Good evening and welcome to the July 26, 2022 regular meeting of the City of Troy Planning Commission. Copies of the agenda for tonight's meeting are available at the entrance to the room. Agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission. State law establishes planning commissions. This planning commission is comprised of 9 residents appointed to serve our community. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. Other individuals participating in the meeting tonight include representatives of the city's planning department, the city attorney's office, and the city's planning consultant, Carlisle Wortman Associates. If you wish to address the planning commission tonight, please come forward at the appropriate time to the lectern when recognized and clearly print your name and address on the sign-in sheet. Please begin your remarks by stating your name for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the planning commission members, not to anyone else in the room. If you have a cell phone or any other device that might disrupt the meeting, please either switch it to the silent mode or turn it off. At this time, I'll ask our planning commission recording secretary, Kathy Zarnecki, to conduct the roll call.
Mr. Biegner?
Here.
Mr. Faison?
Here.
Mr. Hudson?
Here.
Mr. Krent?
Here.
Mr. Lambert?
Here.
Ms. Malala-Holly? Here. Ms. Parakis? Mr. Rahman?
Here.
Mr. Tagle?
Here.
Quorum present, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented tonight. Is there a motion to that effect? Mr. Krent makes a motion and Mr. Hudson seconds it. Any discussion? Ready for the roll call.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Malala-Holly?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Biegner?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next is approval of the minutes from the June 28th meeting. Would Mr. Faison like to move to approve those since his hand was up on the last motion?
Absolutely.
Okay. Is there a second to approve those minutes? Mr. Tagle seconds it. Any discussion? We're ready for the roll call.
Mr. Hudson?
Here. Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Malala-Holly?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Abstain.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Biegner?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is public comment for items that are not on the agenda. Is there anyone here tonight that would like to speak to the commission on an item that is not on the agenda? Seeing none, then we will move on to conditional rezoning. Public hearing for conditional rezoning for proposed homestead condominiums on the east side of Livernois, north of Big Beaver, PIN 88-20-22-301, 007, 008, and 009, which is section 22, from R1E, which is one family residential district, to RT, one family attached residential district. And I assume Mr. Carlisle will do the presentation.
Yes, thank you. As a quick background, an application has been submitted for a conditional rezoning of a property that's approximately 9.5 acres in area. It includes 3 parcels, and the applicant is proposing to construct 30 one-family attached unit development. The site is currently zoned R1E, which does not permit multifamily residential, and they're seeking to conditionally rezone the property to RT one family, and a condition of approval is a site plan that I'll go over shortly. Just for context and with regards to zoning, the site itself is zoned R1E. It's surrounded by R1E to the south and to the east, and those are single-family zoning with single-family uses. To the north is zone PUD. It's a senior living facility as well as preserved open space in the back end of the site. And across the street, across Livernois, is a mix of zoning, includes CF, community facility, Big Beaver, et cetera. It's for the multi-phase apartment building there as well as the community center. As noted, the applicant is seeking a conditional rezoning to rezone it from R1E to RT one family attached. It's hard to see in this map, but RT is this kind of brown hatched zoning up here. The nearest RT zoning is across 75, just south of Waddles. The master plan for this area designates it as single-family residential. The proposed RT zoning is more intense than what is contemplated in the master plan and intended. However, it is consistent with the surrounding land uses, both to the north as well across from Livernois as well. As we know, when we did our review, we did note the site does have a number of natural features on the site, including floodplain, wetlands, and tree cover. We do note that the southern border of the site is bounded by the Lane Drain, which flows into the floodplain, which I'll note here in a second. The applicant proposes to construct all the buildings themselves outside of the wetland in the floodplain. However, there is going to be some what we call cut and fill in the floodplain. I'll talk about that here in a second. In front of you is the map of the proposed of the existing floodplain, as well as the proposed floodplain based on the topographic survey done by the applicant. As noted, most of the site is in the floodplain, so the eastern end of the site is all in the floodplain. The solid red line represents the current FEMA floodplain map. That's done by aerial photography, and it's a best guess done by FEMA in terms of what that floodplain line is. The dashed line is an actual floodplain line based on a topographic survey done by the applicant. That is currently under review by FEMA itself to actually change the boundaries of that floodplain line. And that's where the proposed floodplain line by the applicant is being proposed. We do note that the development itself is outside of the floodplain in the buildable area, but it will require cut and fill within the floodplain itself. So what cut and fill means simply is that a change in a designated floodplain area cannot cause more than 0.1 inch in change into the actual area of the floodplain. So the applicant essentially is what they're doing is they are doing what's called balanced cut and fill, where they're placing fill material in the buildable area, and to compensate for that increase in fill, they're actually removing area in the floodplain to make sure there's no net change to the floodplain area. This has been reviewed in considered by both FEMA as well as our engineering department in preliminary review, and they note that the proposed change by the applicant is consistent with practices that would be approved as preliminary. Now, we'll still have to go through final engineering when it gets to that point, but it has been preliminary reviewed by our engineering and FEMA as well. The applicant, as a result of the cut and fill, the applicant has to remove a significant number of trees on the site. In total, the applicant did survey a total of 809 trees on site. We do note that most of them are invasive. This includes silver maples, box elder, black walnut, elm, and a number of cottonwoods. Of the 409 trees on site, they're saving 407, I'm sorry, of the 809 trees on site, they're saving 407 of those trees. Most of those trees are not protected by our woodland ordinance because they are considered invasive species. The area that they're preserving the trees are those areas outlined in red there. That's the location of the floodplain as well as the location of the lane drain. So the area interior of the site is going to be removed, all those trees, as part of the cut and fill. Of the 809 trees that were surveyed, 57 of them constitute what we call protected trees. And of those, 55 of them were woodland and 2 were landmark. They're preserving 8 of the landmark tree of the woodland trees and preserving 0 of the 2 identified landmark trees. Getting to the site plan itself, again, the applicant is proposing to construct 30 total units. It's going to be located in 6 buildings, with 5 units each in them. The units will be accessed from a private road, which will be accessed off of Livernois. There's no direct access to any adjacent neighbors or properties. It's all accessed directly from Livernois itself. The rear of the sites, again, in the area of the floodplain and wetland, will be undeveloped. It will be in the form of a retention pond, community park, and reserve wetlands. We note the site plan does meet all the required RT zoning in terms of area, height, and setback requirements. With regards to parking, the applicant is proposing 2 parking spaces within each garage. We do note that there is no proposed dedicated guest parking. We certainly think that should be a discussion the Planning Commission has with the applicant. With regard to the community park, I kind of blew up that graphic a little bit. You can tell there's a number of walking trails within the park. They've got a few little playground areas and what they're calling butterfly gardens. They are also proposing a direct connection to the regional trail that runs kind of behind the senior living facility and connects going north. One of the questions we have for the applicant is if this community park is open to the general public or is simply going to be used by the residents of the development. And if it's open to the public, there needs to be some sort of maintenance agreement as well as an easement to allow for public access. So again, we would like some clarification from the applicant about who can use this park as part of the project. The city's traffic consultant, OHM, did a traffic memo reviewing the proposed traffic. They note that based on 30 units, the proposed peak traffic will be minimal, adding no more than 20 vehicle trips at the busiest point of the day an hour. Again, they find that this would be negligible and imperceptible to the majority of the users. As a point of comparison, they note that in January of 2022, road traffic on Livernois was over 20,000 vehicles a day and approximately 1,600 at peak vehicle period. They know that they would only be adding less than 20 vehicles to that already 1,600 vehicles, so again, it would be imperceptible to the average user. The applicant provided with some renderings and elevations for your consideration. This is a rendering. It includes the materials are going to be a black brick on the bottom floor, white hardwood siding, and black metal roofs. They've got two different housing products. The first is a single-level living unit. Again, these are attached single-family dwelling units. The second building type is a ranch with lifestyle space. I think the applicant can go into more detail about what that exactly means. There are a number of standards the Planning Commission should consider with regard to the application. The first is site design standards. There are 4 of them. They relate to building orientation, entrance, ground story activation, transitional features, and site access, parking, loading. The next one is conditional rezoning standards. This includes the protection of public health, safety, and welfare. Conditions proposed are not material conflict with the master plan or consistent with the master plan. Conditions proposed are in accordance with the terms of provision of the zoning district. The development can be accommodated by public service and facilities, and the conditions proposed by the applicant shall ensure compatibility with adjacent properties. So in summary, Mr. Chairman, we are asking the Planning Commission to hold a public hearing, and as part of the deliberations, consider if it meets the conditional rezoning standards and meets the site design standards. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Carlisle?
Just one quick question. We have 6 buildings, Mr. Carlisle, so the heights were not mentioned probably, or I could not find it. And then my question is, are these different height-wise from?
Yeah, so we just got the elevations today. One elevation indicated a midpoint height of 25 feet. The other one was not indicated on the elevation, so I can't speak to the second height of the building, but the one elevation is 25 feet to the midpoint, which is less than the RT requirement.
So the one that has ranch only and then lifestyle space, right? That is the short, that one is 25, is it?
I'd want the applicant to confirm what that height is.
Okay, we'll know from that.
Yeah.
Maybe another question back to back.
Sure.
I know that there will be some development behind the living area, right? Is it really necessary, or is just something that would make this project nicer?
When you say development, that's the area of the floodplain that they have to cut and fill in order to get the required detention pond located there. And so I don't know if they could do this development without impacting that floodplain area and doing the cut and fill. Again, I'll let the applicant's engineer speak to why they're having to do it.
There could be, and then I'd like to know from applicant, the functional reasons for having this.
Yeah, and I think what they're trying to do is because they do have to do cut and fill, they have to do the tree removal. They're trying to make it a more of amenity by putting the community park back there, the trails, et cetera, and they're preserving the wetland as best as they can.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Hudson.
2 questions, Ben. Are there any permanent structures planned for that floodplain?
Other than benches or some other features as part of the trail, there's no permanent structures in the floodplain.
Okay. Second question is, 2 stories. How many feet is that vertically?
So they're indicate like I spoke to earlier. The one elevation showed a mid to midpoint. How we measure height is 25, about approximately 25 feet to how we measure height.
No. My question is, 2 stories. How many feet is that?
To how we
got 2.5 stories, and we got 3. I want to know the basic 2 stories. How many feet is that from the ground up?
So we measure height to the midpoint of the roof. So basically from this point, a slope roof, this point to the ground, this, from here to here is 25 feet. To the peak of roof, it's probably another 5 feet, so maybe to the peak of the roof is about approximately 30 feet in height.
All right. Next question is, any of these elevations planning to go to 30 feet?
As we measure building height, the building height that we're shown is 25 feet to how we measure building height from our zoning
All right. Well, I
definition.
noticed the application said 2.5 to 30 feet.
So one of the conditions offered by the applicant is a site plan. The site plan includes elevation. So if these are the elevations that go to the township or go to the city council for approval, these are the elevations that they have to build under, and that would be locked into the height shown on these elevations, which the one elevation I saw was 25 feet to the midpoint of the roof.
Okay, let me go back to my question. 2 stories is how many feet?
Mr. Hudson, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, you know, you're putting an elevation with a peak up there is counting part of it, but they didn't have it. If there were no peaks in this, and it was a 2-story structure, how many feet would that be from the ground up? Say a flat roof.
30, I believe it's 30 feet or 35 feet. For a 2-story?
Yeah,
If it's a flat roof?
yeah,
So let me take a stab at it.
all right.
The maximum height in the RT district that's permitted is 30 feet. The conditional rezoning application, the site plans is voluntarily offered as part of it, so they've got to adhere to the site plan. Plus, they've got to adhere to the underlying zoning district anyway, so 30 feet. Depending on the type of roof, the type of building and the type of roof, it will not be able to exceed 30 feet. If it is a flat roof, and the maximum they could do would be basically a 15-story first floor and a 15-story second floor totaling 30 feet. It cannot exceed 30 feet. If it's a sloped roof like this, even though when you're looking at it, it looks flat, but it's a pitched roof. It goes to the midpoint, and the midpoint of that roof would not be able to exceed 30 feet by ordinance.
All right, I understand that. All right,
Did I answer your question?
you sort of did.
Okay.
Let's let it pass through. Let's get into the hearing.
I think the point of this, if I may, Mr. Hudson, is the applicant's going to come up here and confirm exactly how high these buildings are, and moving forward, we're going to need a dimension that's clear for all of us to
That's what
understand.
we're going to get to. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Ms. Malahai?
I just need a clarification, Ben, and probably even Mr. Savidant. On the map that you showed where we see the community park and the trails, there is one green trail path that goes into the woods behind the existing senior living facility and the dog park. Is that a proposed trail?
That's a proposed trail to connect to the existing regional trail.
Correct. And one that the city is going to construct
That's,
in the future?
no, our understanding is the developer is, one of my questions was, the developer is definitely going to be liable, is going to be responsible to construct this trail and this connection. My question to the applicant is, for future, who's going to maintain it? And is it open to the public, or is it simply only allowed to be used by their residents up to where it catches the city's regional trail?
And currently, there is no trail there. There is no dirt trail that is going to be paved. There's nothing that exists there, or is there a trail?
There's a trail that, I don't know if you can see it on the, there's an existing trail right there, right?
Yep.
Their proposal is to connect to that existing trail.
Right, I'm aware of the existing trail. I've been on the trail a lot of times. It's a beautiful one till it hits water. It's a nice trail. The one that they are proposing to connect to their development is the one that the builder will be building.
Well, they're going to be responsible to build it. The question I've asked is
Sure.
who maintains it and who has access to it.
Okay, got
So
it.
that's why I'm seeking clarification of that same question.
Absolutely, thanks.
Mr. Savidan, you have some clarification?
Yeah, the applicant's landscape architect has provided a PowerPoint presentation that he's going to show to the Planning Commission, and hopefully he'll answer these questions during his presentation.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Carlisle? I just have two quick ones. One are the number of trees that are proposed to be removed. Is it essentially being done because those are invasive species, or is it because they're required for some of the changes for the floodplain and the cut and fill?
Mr. Chairman, just because it's an invasive species does not mean we're required to be removed. I think they are selectively removing trees interior for the reason of cut and fill. Luckily, or a positive way to look at it is most of them are invasives anyway, so it's not a bad thing to have them removed. They have preserved trees, invasive and non-invasive trees, both in the wetlands because they don't want to disturb that, as well as along the lane drain. One, because it's in the drain, but two, it also provides an existing buffer to the residential to the south. So the short answer is I think they're moving a lot of trees in the cut and fill floodplain area because they're required to as part of the grading requirements. But of those, most of them are invasive to begin with.
Okay. Second question is, and I know I gave you a preview on this, so you probably had a chance to research it. Under the current zoning for that property, how many homes could be potentially put on that site?
I did a really, really rough estimate, and based on what I think the buildable area, I think they could probably get about between 8 and 12 home sites there. Now they could get more if they did a cluster development. You could potentially double that density by doing a duplex or something of the nature. But just under the underlying R1E zoning, I think they could get between 8 and 12 depending on how the road lays out, et cetera.
Okay. And then the last question I have is, under the conditional rezoning, they would not be allowed in the future to put more buildings on the eastern half of the property that's now, they're saying, is set aside for this conservation area.
Yeah, yes, and there's a couple restrictions on that. One is this is a conditional rezoning, so if this goes to council with a recommendation from Planning Commission either for or against, the council will consider it. If it's approved, they're bound by the contractual obligation of the conditional rezoning to build what the site plan shows. The site plan shows no development in that area. That doesn't mean in the future they couldn't come back and seek an potential amendment to it. They certainly could do that in the future. There's no guarantees of that. That being said, it is in a floodplain. Floodplain developments are very restricted in terms of what you can build in, so it would be very, very difficult to build within the floodplain actual buildings themselves. Furthermore, again, it goes back to my question that was asked by Ms. Mahalai earlier, is what are the restrictions of that community park? If that's going to be open and dedicated to the public, it'll be done through a public easement. So then there's even more restrictions if it's done through an easement to limit any future building in that community park area. So there's a lot of ways that the development in the floodplain area on the eastern end of the site will end up being restricted just by the natural course of development itself.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions from the commission?
One quick one.
Yeah, go ahead,
Regarding
Mr.
the
Cranston.
regarding the floodplain, when I look at the map of the floodplain, that's on, I guess, page, see if it has a page number at the bottom, 4, it says 4 page. And it looks like about a quarter of the land is not in the floodplain yet. If you look at the plan of the project, about half of that land is used for homes. So I'm just trying to figure out how to, are you going to fill in that other quarter of the land or whatever it is to make it buildable?
Yeah, that's probably cut and fill. And that's where, again, I'll let the applicant explain how that works. But there is a graphic that actually shows the new floodplain line on top of the site plan on top of that. That shows where the actual boundaries of the floodplain. They're actually going to be outside the floodplain. But again, I'll let the applicant speak more about that.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions from the commission, we'll have the applicant come up and do a presentation and make sure you fill out the form there so we know who's speaking.
You're going to need the remote.
I'll get you one.
I'll continue to fill that out. Good evening. My name is Jim Epping. I appreciate the opportunity to come back to your Planning Commission. I've been here a few times with Joe Miniacci and the Mondrian team. We're happy to be back. Obviously, it's a team you know well. I want to spend just the first few minutes very quickly talking about Mondrian and their team and their continued growth within the city of Troy, and then really acknowledge the work that you guys have done with your master plan and why we think not only the growth within the company, but specifically this project really is part and parcel of what we interpret to be the city's goals and objectives as it relates to the master plan and the zoning ordinance. As you know, Mondrian has been working in the city of Troy for about 30 years. Over those 30 years, we've done about 40 projects, most of them being in Troy. And I think with each and every one of them, we've worked closely with the city, as well as built, very, very good housing stock, and continue to either keep great residents in Troy or bring residents with Troy. Over the last 6 or 7 projects, and one we did towards the beginning of the year, we continue to listen, work with your planning team and staff, work with the Planning Commission, and hear loud and clear that the city of Troy and its master plan is starting to continue to evolve its thinking and start to say, how do we maintain long-term residents to some of the terms that are used are age in place, to remain either in their homes or in nearby homes, but certainly remain within the community and to have housing choices. The city of Troy is fantastic in so many ways between schooling and work experiences and everything else, and housing. But historically, because the school systems have been so good, you've got an awful lot of large, beautiful homes with families that have grown up in them. As your population ages, you've identified, I've kind of interpreted that and agree with it, that you're having fewer and fewer choices for the missing middle, as you've termed it, as well as the aging in place. And so this is a project that we think accomplishes those goals within the zoning ordinance. The commitment from Mondrian to do that is really lockstep with everything the city of Troy is doing. And so what they're introducing tonight and what you'll see, but I just don't want to, I want to acknowledge it because I don't want the confusion, is we've actually created a new branch of the company called Tableau. And so Tableau by Mondrian is the multifamily or the attached single family component of the company. And so that we can have marketing efforts and sales efforts, you'll start to see more and more projects coming to the city of Troy from Tableau, but know that it's Joe and Richard and their team building the same great quality. So thank you for letting me walk through that. As it relates to the master plan and to Tableau, as we started to talk about, you guys have been very, I think, forward-thinking in how do we meet this market? How do we create the age in place and the missing middle? And how do we do that within a zoning ordinance? And what you'll see in many, many communities is their zoning ordinance does not always keep up with the master plan or does not always keep up with what we're doing. Zoning ordinances by their nature are a legal document and require a little bit more to amend. And so there's tools within the zoning law, both in the state of Michigan and within the city of Troy, that allows us to propose different development styles and allows you as a commission to consider it and to ideally make a recommendation to the council to consider that. Conditional zoning is one of those. And really what that is Mr. Carlisle stated, is it's our interpretation of your master plan, our offer, for lack of a better word, our idea to create a neighborhood that we think really meets the intent of your master plan. And then the state of Michigan over the last dozen or so years has created this conditional rezoning, PUDs or other styles, things like that. But it essentially locks us in. It says, hey, we want to do this, and these are all the things that we're going to do, the architecture, the planning, the fitness stations, all those different things, the landscaping, the exact number of trees. And we don't even have to guarantee that we'll do it. We sign a contract, and your building department and engineers and everything ensure that we do that. So that's I say that when I go to communities, because every community has a different level of experience with conditional rezoning, and some are a little haunted by it. But it really is just that ability for us to say, hey, this is what we're really committed to do. We think it's good for the city of Troy, and we'd be willing to sign a contract to ensure that we do that. As it relates really what the city of Troy does, what Mondrian and Tableau do, And what we're committed to do here is to provide lifestyle. We all provide housing, right? But really what we're trying to do is to add to your community, to make places better within the community, to allow people to walk to restaurants, to walk across the street, to the fitness centers, to take advantage of really the church just north of us, the college just north beyond that. I mean, there's everything within there. You can walk down to Cooper's Hawk from here. There's just an awful lot of opportunities in Troy. And all the development that's happened along Big Beaver. So that's what we're looking at, is creating a lifestyle here. Our team, you know us well. We've got John Thompson from PEA, myself, and Paul Sammartino from Martini Sammartino, the architects. We've done a lot of work here. And I'll skip around a little bit because Ben did a good job, but really what we're looking at is 9.5, just a little more than 9.5 acres of land here. It's currently zoned R1E. Within a 5-iron, I'm not a golfer, but I like the term, within a 5-iron, we've got 5 or 6 different zoning classifications all within reach of us. We've got R1E immediately to the south and to the east. We've got a PUD, which is really a senior assisted living home immediately to the north, followed by a church, followed by the college with office and business and community fitness across the street. So this really is what your ordinance and what your master plan talks about as infill development. It's a small lot in the middle of what is largely developed, and it's also a transitional. So it could be looked at as a transitional use between that single family and as we get to the busier zoning uses to the north. Typically would be looked at as that transitional. When I looked at R1E, because I had the same question as you guys, is what could we do if it was R1E? And some of those answers I'll talk about in a minute because it really happens to do with engineering. But R1E, out of all your single family zoning, is the smallest, provides the smallest footprint, the smallest, the most clustered of single family housing. The minimum lot area for single family R1E is 7,500 square foot with a 60-foot lot. So they're really great homes. Obviously the neighborhood immediately to the east, to the south of us has been a terrific neighborhood for generations, great value. And so that's what could be put on this lot as opposed to some of your other zoning, which is the much larger lots and much larger homes. When we compare that to an RT, again, if an R1E is 7,500 square foot, an RT minimum lot area is 5,000. So again, they're within kind of a stone's throw of each other in terms of size and in terms of density. Our density, by the way, is just about 3 units per acre, a little more than 3 units per acre when I divide that by the 9.5 acres. Why then would we not just do R1E? Why propose something under RT with the attached single family? And that's when I go to both your master plan and your zoning ordinance. Your zoning ordinance under RT, unusual for a zoning ordinance, actually references directly the master plan. It references directly this need for attached single family is how you guys term it, because it truly is a single family living that happens to be attached. But it talks about it being an ideal situation for a transitional infill piece, which again is what we are here. So the RT allows us to provide homes that range anywhere from just under 1,400 square feet up to 1,800 square feet. Much smaller, much more affordable to that missing middle and to the people that want to age in place. Completely out of sorts here, so I'm just going to move through this. In terms of the engineering, which is really driving a lot of this, when we looked at this, when John and his team, who I think are probably the best engineers in the state of Michigan, looked at this, the interesting thing is no matter how this property is developed, this buildable area, this cut and fill area, the preservation of the wetlands and the respect and preservation of the drain would all be done the same. So this is a piece of private property. It is zoned R1E. It does have the ability to be developed. And whether I was going to build one home on it or 8 to 10 homes or 15 or 30 homes on it, it would be built exactly the same from an engineering and from a land area point of view. So working with FEMA, working with the state, and working with your city, essentially, as you mentioned, about 25% of it is already above the floodplain to the west. The buildable area really is about 40% of the site as we move further east. And the way that's accomplished is by respecting the wetlands, respecting the drain and all the woods that goes in those areas, and then to essentially dish out that back 60% slightly, that green area in the middle gets just slightly depressed so that flood plain capacity can be stored there, retained there, and then released more slowly into the drain. And then the development area is built up with the compensating cut so that that area becomes that buildable area. So again, if we were building R1E, it would be the same area. If we were building one home for Brent to move to Troy and to live there in his big house, it would be exactly the same area. So it's an engineering thing more than a planning thing. What's great about it is we're preserving the wetlands. We're not touching those or the trees. We're preserving the drain, which not only obviously serves an important purpose to the community, but we're preserving those woods and the buffer along that drain. And I think as we get into the plan a little bit, by dishing out and improving that floodplain capacity area, we're actually capturing the water more directly as opposed to just letting it weep across the different areas. So we'll be capturing that water, putting that into our detention basin, and then releasing it at a regulated rate into the drain as opposed to just, nature the way it does it now, which causes trouble every couple of years. Our plan is Ben Carlisle described, 6 different buildings, 2 different types, so 3 of each, and we'll go through the architecture in the middle. It's served by a public road with some really, I think, beautiful and significant landscaping out in front. So as I continue to go up and down Livernois, it again begins to build to the quality of the community that you have in terms of landscape. We'll have walls out there, just a small subtle sign. We think that the subtlety of the sign and the kind of fullness of the landscape will really add to that area. The landscaping inside the community is really just a tremendous amount of trees. We've got the commitment to reforest the area, and to start that process, we're doubling down on the buffer along the south, so to help with the existing buffer. And then we're creating a number of different community spaces within the neighborhood, gathering areas for the neighborhood residents, the trails that we talked about, and different sidewalks in connection. We're also including park benches, 6 different fitness stations so that people that are walking and using those trails can stop and use those fitness stations, and then some different landscape features like butterfly gardens. I call this a park, and I guess any beautiful open space could be considered a park. It really is meant to be a natural area. We're going to put in that cinder trail, we'll put in the fitness stations and the butterfly gardens, we'll probably have bat houses and things like that to continue to attract animals. But the landscape in the rear is going to be planted with a prairie mix and really encouraged to kind of go back to nature. We'll continue to mow around the trails, we'll continue to maintain the trails, but the rest of it is not going to be a mowed park, it's going to be a natural habitat. I'll get back to the architecture in a minute, but I do want to answer the questions about the trails. So our intention is to have, let me say this. Our intention is to connect to the City of Troy trails going north through the dog park. It's quite a trail system. We don't control the PUD next to us, and so what we're committed to do is to put our trails, to build our trails, to maintain our trails on our property, and to provide that connection to the north. I think working with the city and working with your recreation teams and the trail system here, there's probably the opportunity to work together with the adjacent landowner, to work together with the trail system. We would like to see those trails connected. I think building trails in the city is a series of puzzle pieces. So we want to build this puzzle piece and hope that the city has the ability to connect to it. We'll always, the HOA and Tableau will always maintain the trails within our development. And if they were to connect to the regional system, our assumption would be that the regional system would maintain the trails beyond our property. If we have that connection, we'll certainly and be happy to provide an easement to allow the public to come onto our trails. Our hope would be, I think there's a light in here, our hope would be that the public would come out here, be able to use these trails, enjoy the butterfly gardens. We're going to have those fitness stations. We would about at this point have a sign that says that this becomes private and that these trails coming up to a community area and to the sidewalks would remain really for the enjoyment of the residents here. But certainly these back trails, if connected to the regional system, I think would be great. They're a nice extension. It's a walking trail. It'll be pretty, and they'll be able to use those fitness stations. So we'll continue to work with the city, make that one of our conditions, and have the appropriate easements for that. Our open space on the plan, I said it's 60-40. We actually have about 55% of our land is open space. As I said, of that open space, more than half of it is going to remain exactly as is today. The natural wetlands here, the drain and the buffer to the south. We'll create the engineering that has to go along with this, build a beautiful landscape in it, and part of that will be this detention pond, which really will become a wet pond, pretty to look at, certainly help with habitat, and then release here. Lastly, I'll go through the architecture because I think this is important and it really goes back to your commitment in your master plan. We're providing, as I said, homes that are just a little under 1,500 square feet up to about 1,800, a little more than 1,800 square feet. Let me make sure I get my numbers right. 12 of the units, 12 of the actual residents are going to be on these ranch units. So we'll have 3 of these buildings. Each will have 4 individual homes within it. These are all what we will call ranch or single-level living homes. What's different is these 12 units, the 3 buildings, actually have a bonus room on the second floor. So the master bedroom, the second bedroom, the kitchen, the living room, the laundry, everything's on the first floor, and people could certainly, live completely on the first floor. A home office, a grandkid's bedroom, something like that could be on the second floor, sewing room. And so those are primarily single-level living with that bonus room, and those would be the ones that are closer to 1,800 square foot. The other 3 buildings are what we call single-level living, a true single-level living. These have 6 units in each building, 6 residences in each building, and I would either have 3 families, 3 homes on the first floor and 3 on the second. So it's a complete ranch living. I would either just have an upper unit or a lower unit, and but the bedrooms, there'd be no bonus room on the upper floor. There'd be 2 different residences above each other. In terms of parking, everybody has a garage and everybody has a driveway. I counted, because a lot of our driveways, just because of the configuration, are very long, I counted conservatively, we can park 90 cars off the street. So if we have 30 homes, 90 cars, every home on average could have 3 cars off the street with different configurations. These are 28-foot wide roads. They'll be private roads, but they meet the county standards, and so typically the fire department would allow us to park on one side, and so there are other opportunities between the driveways to park on one side of the road. So from a parking point of view, we'll work with the city, but we think that both for the residents as well as their guests, there's an awful lot of parking on there. The neighborhood, again, is a compact neighborhood. It's at 3 units per acre when I look at the 9.5 acres. What's great about it, I think, from a landscape architect's point of view, is the open space, not only within the units, within the backyards. We maintain and we actually exceed all the R2 setback requirements. R2 rear setback is 35 foot. I think our closest is 38 foot, and some of them are quite a bit further. R2 allows a 15-foot side yard setback. Our smallest is 22, and some of them are 27-foot side yard setbacks. We meet or exceed the front yard setback of R2 as well. So from a zoning point of view, we think that this is a great project. From a community point of view, we think it's an even better project because it, again, I hope helps you guys stand up your master plan, provide that cross-section of housing to the community. We're committed to it. We've done, our last 7 projects have include smaller footprint homes, and we'll continue to do that. So with that, we can answer more questions. John and our entire team is here to answer technical questions. I've taken a lot of your time, and I know it's a public hearing, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mrs. Epic?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Epic? Yes, Ms. Malala.
I do have a couple of questions, but before that, I'd like to thank you for the presentation and the wonderful color images that you provided. And also for addressing some of the things, some of the needs that you have identified that we are in the process of revising, revisiting the master plan, and the missing middle, which we are definitely focusing on, and ranch-style living. And the age-in-place is something that we also need. We don't want our senior citizens leaving the community, but be here and add value to our communities. So thank you for looking into all those, because those are pet peeves for all of us here on the commission. But I do have a few questions. So I'm going to ask a few now, and maybe once everybody else asks, if it still remains on my sheet, then I'll ask you. But I'm still, aside from the fact that I like what you have presented to us, I'm a little concerned about the trail connection. And the reason I am is because you, and if I heard you clearly, you are going to be providing all the trails that are visible right now in front of us, but not exactly a trail that connects to the existing trail that we already have that goes behind the PUD. Am I correct in my understanding?
Absolutely correct, yes.
And that is because that area is actually owned by somebody else, so you need to seek permission, and then that trail has to be built, something that may or may not happen in the future by you.
Well, yes. So you are completely correct that we are committed to building all these trails. We're also committed to put that stub in to, it's almost like a stub street. Your planning commission certainly sees developments that say, hey, here's a stub street, and someday in the future that area next to it may be, so here's a connection point. It really is that. It's a stub street or a stub trail. Not a great marketing term, but it'll get us there so that the next puzzle piece can come down. Different communities do it differently. I know that PUD has already been developed, but maybe there's some opportunity to work with them. But I know that many communities, City of Troy, I believe as well, has a safety path fund and a trail fund. And so I've sat on some of those committees in the past in other communities, and oftentimes what they look for is quick wins. Hey, if we've got a stub here and we've got a stub here, and if we can, as a city, build another 100 feet of trail, then all of a sudden we expand our network. And so that would be this opportunity to provide a puzzle that ideally the city could connect to it at some point.
So at this point in time, it's the ownership issue and also the fact that it's the maintenance issue of the trail. If you were to build it with the assistance of your neighbors who own the land, it would be the maintenance issue too that you're considering in connection.
Well, we would certainly maintain all the trails on our property, but I don't think it would be typical or maybe even appropriate that we would go on someone else's property to maintain those trails. I think those probably either get maintained by the city or whatever entity within the city does at the recreation department, or the individual landowner like we would.
Okay. One more quick question that I'm going to ask. The development as you propose, with the western side being homes and the eastern side being open space, community park, detention pond, what's the split in the acreage? What part of the 9.54 proposed acres is actually being built as in homes sitting on it?
I'm going to phone a friend and see if that'll pull up my calculator. Can I know that rough calculation of how many acres the homes are taking up? About 4 of the 9.5 acres.
Okay. What's a butterfly garden?
So what we don't want that area to be is a mowed grass, right? It's not a soccer field or anything else. So what we've already put in our plans, and as we go further, we'll continue to detail, is what we call a Prairie Seed mix. And so that whole back half area will be planted with a type of seed mix that is allowed to grow and have natural flowers in it, but really just kind of help it go back to nature. Those 2 triangles there, we just thought could be a little more interesting if we've got people back there walking. We've put exercise stations and park benches around those areas. And we'll plant those, we've provided a landscape plan, but we'll plant those with plants that attract butterflies. And so it can just be birds and butterflies and those type of trying to encourage nature to remain and to come.
Thank you. Thank you for answering.
I know recently reading that the monarch butterfly has been put on some kind of close to the endangered species list, so I'm sure the monarch butterflies would appreciate a butterfly garden there, so.
I'll call it silly things, but silly things like that work, right? Bat houses and butterfly gardens, and we all went through this with the bees, and I think are still going through it, so it's important.
Mr. Rahman, I think you had some questions.
Yeah, I do. And then I agree with Ms. Malalahali about your proposal, the functionality and what we need in the city. So thank you for bringing that. But then again, the question is, this is not like a typical buildable area, right? So my questions will be more focused on like on engineering side and somehow how we're going to do that.
Sure.
The first question is, if I look at that diagram over there on the right side, you're going to do grading, right? You're going to cut soil, put them on the left side, make sure that it's high enough so that you can build. That means the other side will be low.
That's correct.
Do you think there will be flooding there most of the year, or no?
Well, it's already a floodplain, so there already is flooding. And what FEMA does and the state does is we calculate how much during a 50, 100, 500-year flood event, how much volume of water is within that area. So it's right now it's as big as, let's say, a bathtub. What we are obligated to do is to make sure, even if we put it in a tiny little area, that we still maintain that volume. And so what we're going to do is essentially squeeze that bathtub to a bushel basket, but we're going to dig it about 6 inches or so deeper so that it maintains that same volume. John can provide the true calculations, but from a layman's point of view, the way I look at it is we're actually capturing that water, holding that water in a more contained, direct vessel, if you will, and then releasing it to the detention pond and then releasing it to the drain in a much more controlled, engineered fashion. So we would expect that and we'll be held to it by FEMA and the state and everybody else, by Eagle, that it will handle the same amount of volume. B, it will not create any additional problems or floodplain or push any water to our neighbors. And I think from a layman's point of view, I think we're going to do exactly the opposite, but we're actually going to dig a deeper hole, and so it'll hold it there and then be released into the drain at a slower speed.
Because I was thinking that, if the drainage is not done properly, and then I know that engineering will look at it and make sure that they agree, and then there could be some ugly situation where, there is stagnant water and the mosquitoes and all these things can come. Because that there is wetland right next to it. And there are other things there also, which is like a forest type situation. Because it's not like only this area is the,
Mr. Ram, if I may, you're exactly right. What's a couple more hurdles for a development team to jump at a safeguard for the city and for the residents is it's not only our engineering team, and then it's the city's engineering team, and then it's the state, Eagle, and then it's the national government, FEMA. And so there's an awful lot of smart engineers looking at this to ensure that happens not only for this property, not only to protect the immediate neighbors, but to make sure the whole regional system continues to thrive.
Okay, so I'm going to switch. Can I ask a couple of more questions? And then, so the next one is my first question is the building height, because you have two types of buildings. So if I'm looking at the diagram, the darker shades have lower height, right? I don't know the numbers. You can confirm at this point, but I would like to know at the end what would be the height of the buildings. And I mean, however you calculate the height, but I'd like to know which one is the taller building and which one is the shorter one.
So I can tell you that now, and I apologize. The drawings that we sent, the elevations that we sent today, I had to go back and look a few times because the dimension is actually kind of on the siding, so we'll slide it over to the side. But they're both essentially the same height. The ranch, which is the one with the bonus room, the middle height, the way the city measures it, is 24 foot. I understand your question. We'll get you what that top height is, but the middle height, as the city measures the height, the way most architects measure it, is 24 foot. The second building, the single-level living, but where I have one on top of the other, that's 1.5 feet taller. So the first one is 24 foot, the second one is 25.5 foot.
So it's not a big difference. There is no. Because I was wondering, if we can swap those two buildings, then the neighbors will not see tall building, but it doesn't really matter because you know what I'm talking about. This diagonally.
If one was 10 foot taller, you'd say, boy, let's put it on the other side.
So it's not going to make a big difference. My last question, and I'm going to let others. You said that you're going to do reforestation. It sounds pretty promising. So what is the plan? Because we're going to cut a lot of invasive trees, but these are trees. No one goes there. It's just a natural place at this moment, and I've seen it's pretty nice, right? So what's the reforestation plan?
Well, so part of our packet was our landscape plan, and we had, as Mr. Carlisle pointed out, a requirement, a commitment to replace the regulated trees on site. We've done that. We've obviously put in street trees. We've put in the landscaping at the entranceway, and then we've added to that. And I apologize, I don't have the numbers. You may have the packet in front of you, but we've really committed to put a significant number of trees into the project, both along that south side, which is already going to be wooded. We're going to kind of double up on that with evergreens. We've also committed to put in the evergreens starting at 8 foot tall, so they're good-sized trees coming in, as well as deciduous trees and flowering trees throughout it. So reforestation, I think, is the technical term for the process. I want to be clear. It's not going to be a forest when we finish it, but there's going to be a heck of a lot of new trees in there. The combination of the significant number of trees, the prairie grass, and what we're building there, you know how quickly when a maple seed falls, how quickly it grows. So the intent is that everything will be put in place to not only have it beautiful when the day we finish, but continue to reforest itself.
Okay, that will be my last question.
Okay.
So you said that in your proposal is that this will be leased to purchase.
So a couple things I skipped over, thank you for bringing me back to that, is this is going to be marketed as a 50 and older community. So we will not have an age-restricted covenant like some communities are 55 and older, but the homes, the kind of lifestyle, the amenities with the exercise stations, it really isn't intended to be for families because of the two-bedroom nature and the single-level living. It's really for that 50 and older community, and so that's where all the marketing levels will be going. What we're seeing with the economy, with the interest rates, and frankly, even before any of that started to happen, just the lifestyle, is people, no matter what income bracket they're at, no matter what age they're at, more and more of our communities are renting. And it used to be a connotation that, only my kid's getting out of college or someone who might be going through some hard times. Those days are kind of gone. People are renting, and almost every rent is significantly more than my mortgage. What it does is it gives freedom and flexibility. Some people like to rent because they love antique cars and they'd rather put all their money into antique cars. Some people rent because they go to Florida. So there's a lot of different reasons, but the market is very, very strong for a rental. We call it for lease because it's not an apartment, it's a home that just happens to be for lease. They're being built as independent homes, so they're going to be separately metered. Everybody's going to have their own water meter and their own electric meter. So if Joe and his team decided, hey, we're going to sell individually, as things have changed, now people want to purchase, they're condos, and so they could easily be sold. The intent right now is to market them as for lease.
So my question is, like, when I lease a car for 3 years, I have the right to buy it. The individuals will have the right to buy that, same individuals, or it's somebody, you may say that no, they cannot.
That's an interesting comparison. I don't think it'll be set up like this. It really, for the foreseeable future, will be a for lease community. If the market changes, because I think what would have to happen is there'd have to be a decision, like, let's just say 20 of the 30 people have lived there for 5 years and they're kind of organized and they're all friends, and they may come and say, you know what, we want to buy. I think it would have to be the type of thing where it would have to all be for lease or all be sold. But the important thing is that from an architectural point of view, from a development point of view, they're going to be built able to be sold.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Faison.
I'll echo the two comments of my colleagues on the housing types and the missing middle and your acknowledgement of that's something that we see a need for. I was curious if this is a concept that you've built elsewhere.
We've built, frankly, I think this is the best architecture I've seen going into this type of product. I think it's testament to Tableau and it's testament to the city of Troy. So the quality of the architecture and I think the fit and finishes inside are not typical for an average for-lease community. We've done different, my company, not necessarily with Joe, I'll ask Joe his experience, they've done so much in the larger single-family home and now they're getting into the attached and detached condos. But these 6-unit and 4-unit buildings I think are a little different. But absolutely what we're seeing in Ann Arbor and in Plymouth and Northville and some of the, the communities that have that active adult lifestyle.
And then one follow-up question, just the unit where there's the stacked ranches.
Yeah.
And I was just curious about that one because, an older person, would they want to walk up to the second floor? That's why I asked about this concept. Have you seen that be attractive to that older market?
It's funny, as a 58-year-old, it's tough to talk about 50-year-olds being old. Older, getting older. But you're right. I mean, my 82-year-old mother's probably going to wait for a ground floor unit. My daughter, who's not 50, will only live on the second floor because she sees it as a safety issue. And she likes the fact that her windows are elevated and her balcony is elevated. So there's different, out of the 30 homes, only 9 of them are on the second floor. So the majority are on the first floor. So there are 9 that will have a ground floor garage, and then we'll walk up to the unit, but then everything will be there. And so I think, I think that the market will be there certainly for those 9 individuals.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Krent?
Again, going back to the open space or the floodplain area, you said you're going to use some kind of prairie grasses, et cetera. Is that because it's going to be deeper, it's going to be more prone to flooding? Is that why you're not putting trees in there? Because trees could, unless they were of the species that live in swamps, which they do, there are, they would rot if you had the wrong species in there. What's the logic behind putting in grass there as opposed to more trees?
We're actually doing both. This is just a graphic, but if you look at the landscape plan that's submitted, you'll see, we did it just kind of from a design point of view, mostly around those triangles where the trails come together, but we have quite a few trees and we're using things like river birch and swamp white oak and different plants that, as we horticulturists say, don't mind their feet being a little wet.
Okay.
But they'll grow fine there.
Okay. And just one comment about the second floor for elderly people. My mother lived in a cooperative apartment, and the bedrooms, her bedroom and all the bedrooms are on the second floor. And I think that actually helped her live longer. She lived to almost 93 because she had to walk those stairs all the time. So I'm not saying, it depends on the person, obviously, but if they're in shape, that's a great exercise, Stairmaster.
I never thought of that. It's great that you had her for so long. Cool.
Any other questions? Mr. Tagle?
Not so much a question, but a comment. I'm very excited about this development. I think you guys have done a great job. The one thing I guess I'd throw out there, maybe it was a question, when I looked at your aerial perspective, the streetscape is a very manicured, cut the lawn, there's some trees out in the right of way there. Had you ever considered pulling some of that more natural look that you're really highlighting and promoting kind of in the back half of the site, pulling that up and making that maybe a little less formal landscape and manicured look, but maybe bring some of that more natural look in there with the grasses, and maybe even reduce some of the maintenance issues. Really, you don't have to get out and cut as much grass or whatever. Just a thought.
I think it's a very good idea. This does look maybe overly manicured. To the north and particularly to the south, we've already got those, the drain, and we've got the woods. There'll be existing trees, and then we're going to bolster those existing trees. And so certainly in the backyard, I think you're going to have that more natural kind of natural edge. Mm-hmm. In the front yards, I think, most people still like to see it manicured, but as we get closer to the edge and then closer to the back, it certainly will take that natural feel. It's a good idea.
Any other questions? Oh, Mr. Savidan.
I can wait till all the planning commissioners ask if you want.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Hudson.
I'm listening to this discussion, and I'm looking at the overhead view from somebody's plane on this property, and it appears as though the trail starts at the dog park and then continues north, and there's a large gap with the PUD. It doesn't appear to be a trail there. So I'm wondering, we were talking about an easement. I don't know how they're going to get an easement from the PUD unless they want to voluntarily do it, but you're going to put a stub in there. And I guess my question is, the conditions being offered, does it contain somewhere in there a provision that if a trail is established and connected, that the public have a right to get into the area? I think you said they probably would. There'd be a sign saying keep away from the homes, but the park area would be available to the public.
Absolutely. Yes, that's our intention.
All right, that's what I thought.
And that's what I meant by easement. We really don't have the ability to gain an easement from the neighbor, but we'll grant an easement within our property on that back half for the
If they can get there, they can use it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Kren.
One other quick follow-up. Have you talked with the neighbors about your project? And he did any kind of surveys? And one point that I wanted to make as far as talking to the neighbors, did they want to connect to that trail system that you have exercise, stuff, or they say, no, keep the drain, in other words, don't put a bridge across the drain, just we want to be independent, completely isolated from that? What was their feedback?
It's a good question. We didn't get as far as talking about connecting to the trails, and my assumption was just because of the drain, we just hadn't gotten there. We actually organized out at Ticonderoga a neighbor's night. We sent, I think, about, I want to say 300. I don't know if that's the right number, but I can get you the right number. But sent out an awful lot of letters and invited neighbors out for coffee or cocktails and kind of a question and answer. We had 3 neighbors that said yes, and we didn't hear from all the others. We ended up talking to, one neighbor couldn't come, we ended up talking to 2 other neighbors on the phone and on Zoom. And so I know one is here tonight, I appreciate his time, and I think he'll probably talk to you. Their concern, like most neighbors always, of course, is, boy, I'd rather just have the woods. I get that. They also have, like a lot of neighbors, have concerns about their neighborhoods and their flooding, and so I think would have the logical concern, are we going to make it worse? And number one, legally, we're obligated. We can't make it worse, and we think we're going to make it certainly better by what I described. So we haven't had any neighbor put in fill out an application to lease a home yet, so I don't know if they're quite there with us yet. But we respect them. We'll continue to work with them. We're committed to being good neighbors. In fact, on my way here, we're doing a big project up in Clarkston, and I stopped and talked to 2 neighbors because they're doing some grading. I just want to make sure things were going well. And so, the good part about Joe and Richard and their team are in your planning commission about every other month, so you can hold them accountable. And frankly, we're willing and always able to do the right thing for the community.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Malala.
I think you mentioned this. What material did you say you were using for the trails?
It'll be like a crushed gravel.
Crushed gravel, okay.
We don't want to asphalt it because it is a floodplain and it will flood. And so we don't want anything to crack. We don't want to use wood chips because they'll probably float away. So we think that compacted gravel is the right thing will be there over time.
Okay, one last question for you. You said that these are lease to purchase. This kind of a lease to purchase, maintenance of the properties, not necessarily the individual property, but generally the area, since will there be like a HOA? What are we looking at here? Because if this is going to be leased and say 3-year agreements or 5-year agreements, and then somebody else moves in, I just want to know what we are looking at. I, for the time that I've been on the Planning Commission, haven't seen one that is a lease to purchase kind of a build. So I'm curious.
So a couple of points that I'm real clear is this will be a leased community that could be purchased. So we're not going into lease agreements with offering the option to purchase, but if we had enough residents that say, boy, we just love it here after 5 years, and they're being built so they could be sold individually in terms of metering and electric and all those different things. They'll all have individual addresses, so they could be sold individually. But it should be looked at primarily as a leased community, leased condominium community. It will be centrally maintained, snow plowed and lawn and flowers and everything, so it'll be maintenance-free living from a resident's point of view.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Any other questions from members of the commission? I just had 2 or 3 real quick ones, and one of them will kind of lead into Mr. Savinant. One is one of our commission members who couldn't be here tonight was concerned about the street parking, and she was wondering, and maybe it's because of the demographics of the people who are going to be primarily leasing the properties here, will there be enough parking available there for the people that live there and for any guests that might show up?
As we said, we talked about this. It's important to us, just from an operator's point of view, that it works. We want people to stay and enjoy it and not park on the lawns. So we went through, and again, I think that conservatively we can have at least 90 cars off the street between the garages and the driveways. Many of these driveways will hold either 2 cars side by side or even 4 cars. So there really is a lot of parking. If 6 people have a Super Bowl is always used as the party example. If 6 people have a Super Bowl party, the neat part is we're in a walkable community where people could park across the street at the community center. There's different options. People are good neighbors and can share driveways. And then because they're wide streets, the county standards, they're presumably will be parking on one side of the street. Not a lot, probably 5 or 6 street parking based on one side of the street. So I think there's a lot there. From a planning point of view, what I'm always hesitant to do is start to create a lot of these perpendicular parkings with 1 and 2 spots here and there, because I really think it starts to look like an apartment complex. I'd rather have it feel like a neighborhood. So I suppose, we could come back if it became such a problem and come back to the Planning Commission and say, hey, we want to add in some parking after a few years, but we don't think we'll need it.
The second one I had is, to clarify, you were saying that the homeowners association would essentially be in charge of maintenance of that park area going on into perpetuity?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, well, we're totally within the 9.5 acres.
Okay. And then the last one is, whenever we deal with a proposed rezoning, we want to make sure we take into account the concerns of the neighbors, and in particular, the ones that, having driven over there, the ones that are at the very end of Lewis Avenue and Troy Avenue, who are going to be right next to the proposed residential units. Is there something in the landscape plan to kind of buffer them so they are not looking out their back window at what used to be a nice green area, and now all of a sudden they're going to see a building?
Yeah. Yes. So again, if we turn to the landscape plan, 2 things I think are in their advantage. Yes, will it be different? Yes. What's really nice about it is a few things. I think the scale of the buildings, although they're certainly bigger than a single-family home because of the roof height and the architectural materials, they're not apartment buildings, they're not commercial buildings, so it'll have a very, very nice residential architecture to it. Secondly, the drain is there, and it's mostly, maybe it's not fair of me to say mostly, it's largely on our side of the property line, the drain. I know it certainly goes on to the south side as well. And then within that drain easement, there's also a lot of woods, not only trees, but brush and shrubs, which really provide most of the privacy. That's going to stay. And then you'll see our landscape plan, because your city ordinance does have a requirement that we buffer single family to RT zoning. We've got new plants, mostly evergreen trees, planted north of that wooded buffer. So we've got the distance of the drain, the existing shrubs, and then more evergreens. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Mr. Savinant, I think you had a question. Before you ask the question, a question for you, because the question is about the trail connection. Has Mr. Bovenseep, Troy's Trail King, had a chance to look at this and sees the potential for a connection to our existing trail there?
I don't know if I've had that specific conversation with Mr. Bovenseep, but I'd like to speak to this.
Okay.
Kind of hint to that, if I may.
Sure.
So as we talked about earlier, there's an existing trail that was shown on a slide that goes from the dog park, which is just on the PUD property, goes through the north. It goes through the church property, through Walsh College property, through the Oakland County Water Resource Commission property, and it's quite the partnership allowing these easements to go all the way from the dog park to Waddles. I'm going to be long-winded, but I'll get to my point. So if you recall, the PUD itself is a partnership. The developer of the assisted living facility partnered with the city. The city allowed them to do some cutting and filling on city property. We shared parking, and they made a financial contribution to allow the construction of the dog park. So we've got a very good relationship with the assisted living folks, and I imagine, I can't speak for sure, but I would imagine they would be open to dialogue about that closing that gap. It's about 600 feet plus or minus. Now, if it's wetland, it's going to be a boardwalk. That's going to be expensive. If not, in any event, it's going to take some money. In all likelihood, the city of Troy is going to have to be a player in that. I don't think the PUD, out of the goodness of their heart, is going to want to put 600 feet of trail in. Now, that being said, I believe the city would be more open to partnering if this trailway connection were extended through the PUD property and extended all the way to Livernois Road. And hear me out. You'll recall when we were amending the master plan, we focused significantly on mixed use and on missing middle housing. And in fact, I traveled to a number of communities in the Midwest, including Carmel, Indiana. And we toured around with the mayor of Carmel, Indiana, looking at these awesome developments all around Carmel. And he actually was driving, and he pulled over once, and he said, "Look at that." And he pointed at a regional trail that was backed up to some newer units. And I said, "Why are you stopping here?" And he pointed and he said, "That's waterfront property." So what do you mean? We don't have a lot of water here, but we have trails, and people pay a premium to live next to trails, so I call that waterfront property. My point is there's a premium for living next to regional trail systems, which this potentially is. So I look at this as an opportunity, and once this is handed over to the HOA, this opportunity is lost. I think that, there's studies out there that back me up, that these add value to properties, developments like this. And I don't see the downside to, at least along the north here, of this being 10 foot wide, a public easement that connects all the way to here, which allows connection all the way here, which would make the city a lot more open to partnering on extending it all the way to here, and all of a sudden, whammo, we have a trailway connection that goes from here, basically across from the community center, all the way up to Waddles. I don't see the downside. I don't see the downside. Now, this is a conditional rezoning application. We certainly cannot hold the developer hostage on this, but I think this is an opportunity. I'm also thinking of the neighbors that abut to the south, to the east. They're not going to be able to access that trailway system unless they go all the way up to the dog park. When they could walk down to Heartland, hit Livernois, walk up here, and whammo, they're on the trailway system. They actually have an opportunity to participate, to utilize it. I see the marketing materials. It's all about lifestyles and fitness and active and connectivity. And I heard it was Jim with an outstanding presentation this evening. I heard all that, and I think this is consistent with that goal of having connectivity and having walkability and lifestyle and all that. And I would like to hear the developer explain the downside to connecting this to Livernois. I'd really like to hear it.
We're not against that. In fact, that was our idea to offer to go to the north completely with Mr. Savedant in terms of the value of the trail systems and entire generations, from very young to very old, enjoy them. We tried to figure out within our team, just from a safety and security point of view of kind of inviting the public to go past it. But they're not a lot different than public sidewalks. And so I think that there's probably a solution in there. And, particularly if we can work with the city and look for it to join to the north, there's probably less incentive for us to be excited about it if it's just inviting people into the back of our property where there's not through traffic, if you will, and all of a sudden we've got kids back there drinking at night. But if it truly is a through system, I think there's value there as well.
I think that's an outstanding point. The willingness and the attractiveness of entering into that relationship is a lot stronger if there's a connection through that PUD property. I agree with you.
Thank you, Mr. Savedant. Good point. Yes, Mr. Hudson.
I think that's a fascinating idea and a good presentation. I'm just wondering, though, this is a conditional rezoning. I'm sure the developer would like to get to city council as quickly as he could. But is it worth putting the brakes on for a moment to explore a little more detail your idea about this trail extension from Livernois?
Well, I guess the owners here, the owners development team, the landscape architect, civil engineer, they're all paying attention. The city, the planning commission is a recommending body. This certainly within your purview to make a recommendation to, for further consideration of this. They're paying attention. They're listening to the conversation. We haven't even had the public hearing yet and listened to the residents. But I think, given the fact that we're a recommending body, I don't know if we necessarily have to stall it here, depending how the public hearing goes and depending how what the planning commission thinks of this development.
If I may ask a question then. Sure. If we conditionally approve this and it goes to city council for review and their action, are we confined just to the offer made to make a decision on, or can we tack on these appendages regarding an extension of trails in our recommendation?
So I'll answer, but I'm going to leave it open-ended and defer to the city attorney. So conditional rezonings, all conditions must be voluntarily offered by the applicant.
Precisely.
So my answer is no. We can't put conditions on what the developer
No,
is
I
going
didn't
to.
say conditions. I said recommendation.
We're approving. You'd be making a recommendation, but based on what's presented.
I hear you. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond to Mr. Hudson?
Sure.
I think what I would, how I would respond is securing easements tends to be a very long process. Even for everybody at the table all saying this is a great idea. And so I think that Tableau would continue to be a willing participant in those conversations. We'd ask that we don't hold up if this needs to be held up for other reasons, I certainly get that. But that I'd like to say if it's a through trail, I think there's a lot of value there for everybody
You
involved.
said something that I didn't think about. Developer's going to own, or the organization Tableau is going to own the real estate. They will be leasing it. So if this were to happen, the player would be the developer's corporation if it was going to happen. It makes it a lot easier than dealing with 50 people.
100%.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, any other questions from members of the
Just
commission?
one
Yes, go ahead.
follow-up question. So are you going to be leasing this facility, or are you going to rent it out to somebody else, or somebody will manage it? Like, because Mondrian, I don't know if you have done this kind of leasing. That's something that I'd like to know.
I'm going to use my second lifeline. I don't know the answer to that. You have a leasing company.
Okay, thank you.
But again, it's in our hometown here, so we'll be very involved.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's go ahead and have a seat.
Thank
and we will open the public hearing. Any members of the public that would like to address the commission on this proposal, feel free to come up to the mic and make sure you sign in, so don't all rush at once.
Mr. Chairman, while the resident is going to the podium, I just want to state for the record, we received a number of emails, probably around, I didn't count them, around 30. They were printed off, they were combined into a PDF and emailed to the Planning Commission. They're also printed off and they were provided to each hard copy, just for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Savin.
Hi, I'm James Warren. I live on Helena. I was wondering about that depression that's going to be left there to grow wild. That sounds to me like it's going to be a swamp. Is that what's going to be there, or do we know?
When you're finished with your comments, and we will talk with our...
Okay. Another thing, I've lived there for 12 years, and over the 12 years, I've enjoyed many hours sitting across the lane drain watching the wildlife, specifically the white-tailed deer. And I want to know what's going to happen to the deer when this 9.5 approximately acres gets taken up from them, and all the other animals. That's all I have.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm in healthcare. I always carry my own pens.
Might be better than the city's pen, so.
Hi, my name is Tom Avery. I've been in Troy for about 40 years, the last 28 years. I'm at the east end of this piece of property. As to the butterfly gardens, you don't have to worry, they'll be disappeared anytime, really quickly. The deer will eat them all. We haven't been able to grow anything for about 20 years in our backyard. There's about 15 to 20 deer that kind of wander through there, and I go out and shoot them, and my grandkids pet them. You mentioned, interestingly, walking along Heartland. That's a very difficult thing to do. So a connection through here, I think, would be much safer. Heartland is very busy, as you can tell by the destroyed roadbed there now. I honestly believe that they've accomplished something really good with this. My only concern is I don't know if we're aware what creates that wetlands to the north of there. On the east end of this property, where you see the curve up to the north of the lane drain, yes, it does turn to the right, but between our two pieces of property is a fairly ancient ditch that runs along the backside there. That's been there since it was farmland. About a third of the ditch is on my side, and the other 2/3 is on their side of the land, although it curves a little bit away. So when we've had these storms, last year was a particularly bad year for the storms. Between 150 and 200,000 gallons of water pour north up that split there, and they end up in my neighbor's property, and they fill in the back. It's great for ice skating in the wintertime. But it also then comes back. It goes about 40 feet into my property, and I end up with all kinds of various things, from wheelbarrows to baby strollers to all kinds of other garbage that I've collected over the past 25 years. A concern that I have is if they're capturing this water there, that's nice because I won't have the back 30 to 40 feet of my property flooded. But as it's released into the lane drain, it will continue to erode my part of the lane drain, because historically that drain went through the middle of my property, which is now there. My father-in-law had that corrected while he was there, which is why I live on, concrete clay. You can't build anything there but clay. And it's eroding slowly. You can see my trees are all leaning into the lane drain just because of the erosion. So that's a concern, that instead of going down when the water is lower and it's filled up in there, it's not going to be released in there, so it's going to be eroding constantly down that lane drain rather than being there for a shorter period of time and slowly coming from the north down. All right. When the surveyors were there last November, they had to keep moving around because they kept sinking 4 to 6 inches into my property. So it was wet in the middle of November. They needed to come back in December when the ground was solidified. And that's not an every year event. That's kind of an every 2 to 3 year event. So it's possible that this will be good. It's also possible, again, that it's going to continue eroding further into my property. And that's a big concern of mine because I can't get anybody to address that from the city. So again, overall, I think it's fair that the people that have been trying to sell that property for a long period of time can have something, can sell their property and get something built. I actually would be interested, except that it's a lease property and I'm not interested in leasing going forward. I'd love to move from there towards the road, but not interested in a lease. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Anyone else like to address the commission?
My name's John Phillips. I live on Frankton, which is right about where that middle trail would, I guess, go into on the picture. I did meet with the developers via Zoom meeting, and I was scheduled to go to the Ticonderoga, but it got canceled. I looked at their basic layouts, and most of them had, as had been pointed out, had stairs in them. After hearing hearing Jim, he said only 9 of them were second level up homes. My main concern is if it's targeting for 50-year-olds and up, that less likely people are going to look for something that have stairs that have health issues, or we're going to be long-term. If these are going to be leased, then the long-term kind of changes, because it's also, I would think, harder to get someone to lease something that they want to be as their last home for that, the last sprint of 30, 40 years of hopefully. So that was something I was looking at. Looking at their drawing, they're moving everything, or moving the dirt from the east side to the west in order to build up so they can get above the floodplain, basically. Looking at this, my question is, why couldn't they have 4 buildings instead of the 6, thus reducing the amount of fill that they'll have to take in order to stay above the floodplain for the building area? This would greatly reduce the amount of tear down, I think it is what they referred to it at, on the east side, and hopefully reduce the amount of deforestation that's going to happen there. Based on the picture, it looks like there's not a lot of trees planned for that. What's currently there, I think the number was over 800 trees were going to be removed, but only, was it 80, I believe? 80 were going to be put back. So that's only 10%. So that's a lot of trees that aren't going back that are currently there that are supporting the wildlife. Jim did mention the bat houses. That was one of the things that I commented on in our meeting, because we have a large bat population. It maintains our insect population in the area. And when you remove the old growth trees, you remove the homes that they're currently living in. The deer, we have every known creature known to man. The only thing I don't think I've seen myself is a coyote. Someone else supposedly did, but that's the only one I haven't seen on our street. And we have runs of deer going down our street and then running back into the woods again. I have a webcam on my front yard. I was talked about aged versus the new plantings. Older trees, once again, support different types of wildlife than the new trees. The other question I had, and I think it was commented also, is that the development is going to support the walking trails on their property. My question is, if that becomes quote-unquote public for people to use on their property, what happens when there's an issue on the property, drinking, teenagers in general, and somebody reports it, who's responsible, who's liable? Because is it public trails or is it private trails when you start tying into the city system? And it's on private property. So I wonder if that's some sort of an issue you have to address there. Having more of a buffer zone there on the south side where the trail runs along the lane drain, we'd love to have that further away from it so we have less noise interaction. And the last one I have is, if you look at the basically look at the picture and you see the tans and the browns, that is all flat space where water can't go. So that water has to go somewhere. Yes, you have a retention pond, but at some point in time, the pond isn't going to be able to hold the water that you're not allowing to drain or to soak into the ground there. Case in point, we have Cooper's Hawk at the end of Frankton, and I believe it's Troy. It's a small building, relatively speaking, but the parking lot is huge. And I don't believe anybody kind of factored in the amount of water runoff that will result when you basically pave over ground and have no place for it to soak in. So it's then, instead of being tied into what I would have thought, a big beaver drain system, they tied it into the drain on Frankton and I believe Troy, and it now drains into the lane drain, thus resulting in your additional flooding over the last couple of years. I think it's been the last 3 years we've had higher water levels than ever before, all since Cooper's Hawk has opened and the parking lot was built. So that's another concern. You have a retention pond, you're trying to address the additional water possibility, but I'm kind of worried that the green space of the park area is going to become more of a swamp area than a basically park area. I would love to see that quote-unquote park go back to nature, put more trees in, sure have walking paths, but basically reforest it. I think it was you who said you walk along that trail, and I was on that trail and I'm going, it's really nice that everything kind of closed over. It feels like you're in the woods. And you're not. You're within 100 feet of houses in most cases, but it feels like you're in the woods. Having something like that, the way it's pictured here at least, doesn't make you feel like you're in the woods. It makes you feel like you're walking around another park. And if you want that, there's the dog park. There's a lot of other trails available. So that's just something that hopefully you guys can address. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public that would like to address the commission? Come on up.
Hello, my name is Odetta Feseni, and I live in 3312 Lewis Drive, which is the first street to the left. I have multiple concerns with this development, and they mostly fall into 3 categories. I'm concerned it will decrease my home value because there's a quote from the Troy Master Plan, actually, from 2016. Chapter 7, Green City, Responsibility to Natural Energy Resources. In page 49, it says, the value of home sites adjacent to open space parks, wetlands, green belts, and other green amenities is greater, all things being equal, to similar sites not adjacent to such amenities. So rezoning this property, I believe, will have an adverse effect on the value of the home sites, and including perhaps even lower assessment value. And on top of that, my worst concern is what other speakers also spoke about, which is more frequent flooding. I've only been there 5 years, but I've seen at least 3 big floods where my whole backyard was flooded, and it went high onto my mailbox, and it even touched my air conditioning unit, which is in my backyard. Also, the master plan calls for preservation of natural features and more green spaces for Troy, not less. It's nice that they're thinking of building this butterfly garden But what does that matter when you're taking so much environment from wildlife that considers that home, that's a passageway, it's a deer crossing, deer cross on both sides of Livernois over there, and connect to the rest of the natural area that's in the around the bike trail. So that's really a huge environmental impact, and it's not just deer, it's also foxes. And the lane drain, actually, I heard from some of the neighbors, it used to be a wetland designation, but I think in February or March, when the ground was still frozen, they did some studies there, and they said, oh, it's not wetland anymore. And I believe it was from Oakland County. And isn't the Michigan DNR supposed to change the designation from wetland to not wetland? The lane drain is a passageway not only for geese and ducks, which are like common waterfowl, but also I've seen gray heron, like more airbirds, and they also go there, and they also go to the pond that's next to the bike trail. So the environment, and obviously the deforestation with numerous plentiful deer that is there is going to have a huge adverse environmental impact. And my last concern is that it's a leased community. It doesn't say that in what was mailed in the letter to the residents. It says condominiums, but this completely changes the scenario, because with a leased community, you get residents that are less accountable to their neighbors, less accountable to the environment, more noise, more traffic in our neighborhoods. So being a leased community, it's like having rental properties. It's much worse for the value of the surrounding neighborhood homes to have a leased community. So I do oppose the changing of the rezoning of this. And also the developer did say that they're going to advertise to, they're going to market to more older communities, 55 and up, but that doesn't mean anything. This is going to attract people that cannot afford to buy a home but want to be in the Troy School District, to send their kids in Troy School District, like I did and like many other people did, like me. And that's going to increase the number of students at Waddles Elementary School. And the classes are already full, and they don't even have a room to do their media. They don't have a media center room. They do it in the hallway. So there's no more room there to build more classrooms other than to increase the classroom size. And because my son goes there, I'm also concerned about that. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to address the commission? Anyone else? Then I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. Some of the questions that were answered, the petitioner or the applicant may be able to answer some of them, but I'm going to have Mr. Savin talk about the whole issue of flooding, because I know that's one of the big concerns that occurs whenever a development like this is proposed.
Yeah, if this project moves forward to City Council and ultimately receives preliminary site plan approval and rezoning from City Council, the next step will be for the owner to get his civil engineer to do the engineering design on this. And the engineering design, the engineer is obligated to design a development that does not negatively impact abutting properties in terms of drainage. So you know, they're not. This development will not exacerbate any existing situation. In fact, and I'm not a civil engineer, but there are engineers sitting here in the room. If you have specific questions for the civil engineer, but for developments like these, there's opportunities to actually make improvements to existing situations, which I'm hearing from Mr. Epping that's a possibility here. Again, when we have currently with with this property without a detention basin, the rain falls and it sheet flows and it all at once goes into the lane drain, whereas with the detention basin, it'll be able to go into the detention basin, at least a lot of the water, a lot of that volume, and it'll be able to be metered out into the lane drain and take the edge off that flooding and meter it out over time, so it doesn't have as much velocity and the current doesn't have as much erosion and doesn't have as much impact on the lane drain and on the residents. So there's an obligation to design this to accommodate that stormwater. And there are engineers listening. Then we all know the last 2 years, maybe 3 years, there's been a lot of rainfall. A lot of times, sometimes new development gets blamed for the increased flooding when it's not necessarily. I'm not doubting the resident, but in some instances, it's not the development down the street. It's the fact that we've got significant rain events that we haven't seen recently. So hopefully I answered your question.
Were there any other comments that you wanted to address based upon resident input?
I took some notes. The depressed area, which I assume is the area to the east, which Mr. Epic indicated there'll be some trees, but there'll be some native grasses. That depressed area, will it be a swamp? It's not going to be a swamp. It's got to be designed in such a way that it's not a swamp. It is a floodplain. It will flood, but that water's got to drain off in a timely fashion, so it's not a swamp. That will have to be designed that way. Deer and animals, where do the deer and animals go? When the neighborhood to the south of the drain, that's homes now, when that was built, there was animals there. They migrated to the north onto this property. There's still going to be a significant amount of this property that's uncut. Even after the site work, again, there's going to be floodplain with grasslands and trees. I'm sure a lot of the animals will stay on this property, and it's contiguous to significant woodlands to the north. So my guess is the animals are going to scooch north a little bit and probably stay in this area. But I'm no expert. Why were 6 buildings proposed versus 4? I can't answer that. We're reviewing the application that was submitted. That's a question for the owner or Mr. Epping. There was a question or a comment about how many trees were removed, preserved, and planted. There's 807 trees on site. 400 are removed, 407 will remain, and then the applicant's going to plant over 200 new trees of a higher quality, because most of the trees on the site now are invasive species like cottonwoods and elm and things like that. So fewer trees will be on site when it's all said and done, but higher quality trees. I think I've answered all the questions.
Quick question.
Except the one.
Yeah, if you look at the community park area, I only see 10 trees there, so it probably is not representing the exact situation, right?
That's what Mr. Epping said earlier.
Yeah, okay.
There's a landscape plan in your packet on sheet L1 that shows the plants, the locations, the species, the sizes, and there's a list on the right-hand side, and you can count how many trees. There's a significant amount, and it's numerous different species.
Yeah, because this is kind of not representing the exact situation. Okay.
I know there was one question about if there's some rowdiness that goes on in some of the trail system here. Is that still, even though it's privately owned, that still would be responded to by the police department, I would assume?
Yeah, I would defer to the city attorney on this.
Well, it depends on how that public-private partnership, that easement is worded, but I imagine the police department would respond either as a trespassing call or, a noise complaint if it's after city's hours. Yeah, there's ways to deal with that.
Yes, Mr. Krent.
As far as I know, and again, this could go back to the legal department, I thought all sidewalks in the city of Troy are open to anyone walking on those sidewalks. I didn't think we could have a private sidewalk and put a sign up and restrict people going on your sidewalk in front of your house. Is that true or not?
Mr. Krent, I'm not sure, but this is a private development.
Okay.
So
it's the whole, because it's a lease thing and not privately owned by individual homes?
right, that's not, is that going to be, I think that I heard too, is this a private road or a public road?
Private.
Private road.
Okay.
So it's only a
So it is
public
private
it's only a
property.
public sidewalk if it's adjacent to a public road. So this isn't a public road into
Okay.
this development.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Buechner.
I had a question and a couple other thoughts. The retention pond is how deep? 4 feet. A couple things. I've lived in Troy for 26 years. I live on a major trail and have been in the same house for 25 years. I got a lot of people going by. I've never had an issue. I had a beer can in my yard. I have seen a lot of bikes, seen a lot of people walk by, a lot of kids. 25 years in the same house, I've never had an issue. And I love this city. The retention pond, these guys know what they're doing. I've dealt with commercial buildings and flooding, and I feel good about that. I like the green space that I'm seeing there. Can we look at some details that could be tweaked a little bit? I'm sure we could, but I like the pathways. That's my 2 cents.
Mr. Epic, are there any of the questions that came from citizens that you'd like to respond to?
Mr. Sevenin really handled them well, and I appreciate it. If you'd like more detail from me, I can. I'll take a crack at just that 6 versus 4 building. And a lot of it just has to do with economics and math. This property is privately owned, and those people, I suppose, have owned it for a long time and are looking to retire, and you know, properties these days cost a lot of money. What also costs a lot of money are things like the street. Less than 10 years ago, 1 foot of street cost about $400. I'm being told now that a foot of street, a foot of road costs about $1,500. So just in 10 years, it's more than tripled. And then that's one of the reasons why in good communities like the city of Troy's homes get bigger and bigger, right? Because we have all those economics. The property costs so much money, the road costs so much money, the infrastructure costs so much money, so I've got to build a big home to try and make that same amount of sale profit. So when the community has the goal of building smaller homes, and it makes a ton of sense, there's still economics involved. And so I think what you'll see with this development and with other developments that'll come forward is it's not always as easy as saying, hey, this property is equipped to have 10 homes, so let's have 10 small homes, but let's keep everything else the same. We still have to cover the cost of the property and the cost of the roads and all those other things. And so one of the ways we do that, and I think one of the realities is typically these smaller homes make great neighborhoods, and great neighborhoods are oftentimes more compact, more closer knit communities. So it's not a detriment, I don't think, but it is a reality. And so there is economics at play, and we just have to try and balance the development and the goals and the quality of the development with the cost of the land and everything else.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Krent.
Just a quick thought. What do you expect these homes to rent at?
Know that. It really, I mean, things are changing so often. The good thing is materials are coming down, but they're going to be well built, as the car company says, nicely appointed homes, and so we'll have a market rate rent based on those.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
One quick question.
For Mr. Epic?
Yeah, Mr. Epic. So you mentioned that there will be 90 car parking provisions, right, overall. And I see that there are a lot of driveways, right? So did you really count, and then one side will be like no parking. So did you really count it, or it's just a guess?
Well, so a little bit of both. So we have 30 homes. About half, or a little bit, about 2/3 of them have 1-car garage, and then a driveway in front of that garage. About 1/3 of them have a 2-car garage and then a 2-car driveway. So some of them will have 2 cars in the driveway and in the garage and a minimum of 2 cars behind it. Some of them will have 1 car in the driveway and a minimum of 1 car behind it. So essentially every unit self-parks, assuming they have 2 or more cars. Then what you'll see is a lot of these, just because of the nature of the curve on the street, the roundabout, and so forth, have much, much longer driveways. So many of the driveways will hold, 2 cars in front of each other, one in the other, or 4 cars in front of each other. So I did go through and said, okay, if these all have this many garages and they all have at least that number of cars on the driveway, and then some of them have more, is how I got to 90. So I think that's a very close estimate.
Okay. Yeah, because the only reason I'm saying that, because normally if there's one building, there will be just one driveway, right? Then we have a lot of space to have your car parked on the street. But here it's like each of them have like 6 of them, so that actually reduces significant number, of spots.
You're completely right. There's not that gap between driveways and this. So that's why I said that we will ideally have, based on the fire and safety departments, we'll have one side parking, but it'll probably gain us about 5 or 6 spots. It won't be a typical type of larger lot subdivision where you have street parking.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, bring it back to the commission for a resolution. Yes, Mr. Tagle.
Yes, resolved that the Planning Commission hereby recommends to the City Council that the R1E to RT conditional rezoning request as per Section 1604 of the City of Troy zoning ordinance located on the east side of Livernois, north of Big Beaver, within Section 22, being approximately 9.5 acres in size, be granted for the following reasons. Number 1, the request complies with the master plan. Number 2, the rezoning would permit greater flexibility in use and development of the property. Number 3, the conditions offered by the applicant reasonably protect the adjacent properties. Number 4, the rezoning would be compatible with surrounding zoning and land use. Number 5, the site can be adequately served with municipal water and sewer. Be it further resolved that the Planning Commission recommends the following site plan design considerations. Number 1, provide conditional rezoning agreement prior to City Council consideration.
Before I entertain a second, to make sure the legal department and our planning director are okay with the wording, and that would include anything related to an easement with the property.
I didn't hear a voluntarily offer this evening for an easement connecting the Choe to Livernois Road.
So that would be something that would be the petitioner would possibly offer to City Council if they decided that they wanted to do that when it goes to City Council?
That's my guess, yes.
Right, and that's why we put a condition, not a condition, but the conditional rezoning agreement will have to be, Mr. Maniaci's attorneys will get an agreement to me to review. That will be presented to City Council. So that's sort of the opportunity to any other tweaking to the offers that the developer wants to present for City Council.
Great, thank you. Is there a second to the motion? Yes, Mr. Krent seconds it. Any discussion on the motion? Yes, Ms. Malala.
So as I understand then, we cannot say or make any suggestions in case we cannot make any suggestions. Even if later on, down the road, 3 years, 4 years down the road, a trail system is built, we cannot make any suggestion that it be connected to the existing trails as we see in this map, and that it will be part of public access. We cannot.
Not in this resolution, but I'm sure based upon the comments that have occurred tonight that city staff will be working with the developer, and future plans would probably be ironed out between now and then. Is that correct?
That's a distinct possibility.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? My only comment was, I think the plan is a great plan, but I am still concerned with one aspect, and that is that the protecting the adjacent properties, I'm still concerned about, especially those people on Lewis and Troy Avenue, whether they've been adequately protected. And hopefully when this comes to City Council, some of those conditions will be explicitly stated so that, for example, adequate screening of trees occurs. With that, I guess we're ready for a vote on the resolution.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
No.
Ms. Malala?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Biegner?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. And as we stated, this goes to City Council next, so as we said, we're merely a recommending body, but City Council will make the ultimate decision on this. So, all right, Mr. Sevenant.
For the record, I think it would help City Council if was your no vote, just out of curiosity, was it based on your concern of the screening?
Protecting the adjacent property owners, yes. Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is potential plan unit development application, a concept plan discussion for property east of Livernois, north of Square Lake, pin 88-20-03-301-088, 88-20-03-301, 025, 024, 023, Section 35, currently zoned NN Neighborhood Node Q and R1B, one-family residential districts. And Mr. Carlisle, I guess you have it again.
Yes, I have a very brief presentation. So a concept plan has been submitted for a plan unit development for a site that is adjacent to the northeast corner of Square Lake in Livernois. The concept plan in front of you includes a total of 51 total units. And it includes various mix of housing types. Additional amenities proposed by the applicant include the preservation of 2 existing single-family homes, homes with first-floor masters, stormwater management of the site, as well as a small play area. The site is mixed zoning. On the southern half of the site, it's zoned form-based, and on the northern half, that yellow color is R1B. Planning Commission may remember the part that is currently zoned form-based was approved for a 14-unit attached townhome project. This is the project in front of you. It gets access. Brent, what's this? I'm sorry. What's the road across the road here?
This here?
Yeah.
Square Lake.
Square Lake, I'm sorry. So it gets access off Square Lake, and then there's 14 units internally. There's no exit or any other cross connections other than the access to Square Lake. This was approved in 2018. The applicant is seeking to amend that plan to incorporate that portion of the development into the overall development of the entire site. It's a little bit hard to tell here with these boxes, but the boxes there represent different housing types. So in total, they're planning on preserving 2 existing single-family homes, which front the road right there, as well as provide for 4 single-family ranch homes, which are spread on the northern end of the site, adjacent to existing single-family to the north. 10 2-story attached products, which are located in this general location, and then 35 3-story attached townhomes, which are mostly in the southern end of the site, in conjunction with where they had the approved 14 units as well. We do note that this is the only graphic that we've got is just this site plan. It's very conceptual at this point. There are a lot of discussion points to have with the applicant, including architectural quality, elevations, material selection, building height, other on-site amenities. These are all important elements that should be discussed with the applicant if this does move forward. With regards to the master plan, this is located within the neighborhood node, though it is only zoned, it is zoned both R1E and form-based. The Planning Commission spent a lot of time with regards to the neighborhood nodes in general, and specifically with this node as well. As part of that, the steering committee, in partnership with the Planning Commission, has amended the draft statement for this particular node. I'll just read it real briefly here. It says, development in this area should be especially considerate of the remaining historic assets of the neighborhood. When possible, adaptive reuse of existing historic structures must be considered before demolition or relocation of those resources. Low-intensity uses working in conjunction with one another to form a central neighborhood village, walkable and accessible, would create an ideal complement to the predominantly residential surroundings. That's the revised statement that the steering committee and the Planning Commission has come up with for this particular node. This is a plan unit development. There are specific standards that the Planning Commission is well aware of what those are. There are 8 standards for the consider. And so as part of the deliberation, Mr. Chairman, I just outlined some general basic questions for the Planning Commission to consider as part of the discussion. First, is the proposed plan consistent with the master plan? 2, does the Planning Commission support the proposed mix of housing types? Are there additional types or changes in types that the Planning Commission thinks should be considered? 3, is the proposed plan consistent with the PUD standards? 4, are there site plan changes that the applicant should consider? And lastly, are there other considerations that should be discussed with the applicant? Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. Open for any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Carlisle. Any questions for Mr. Carlisle?
site plan right now. I don't see it. I think it's already.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Tagle.
Mr. Carlisle, do you remember, or can you tell us what was approved a few years ago? What housing type was that?
Those are the 14 that were approved before?
Yeah.
They were townhomes.
And were they a two-story version?
They believe they were three-story townhomes.
They were? Okay.
That was, remember that Mr. Tagle, that was before the zoning ordinance amendment that reduced the height to 2 stories adjacent to residential.
Yes, Mr. Faison.
Just to follow up to that, so is that still approved, or does that approval lapse with the passage of the time since 2018?
That is approved. He could build that. He's seeking to amend that to build this current plan in front of you. But yes, it's
So that approval is still valid?
It's valid, and plans have been submitted to engineering for the engineering design.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Carlisle, are you able to use your little pointer to show us on that map there what has been approved and what is proposing to add?
This area is area zone form-based. There's a 14-unit development approved in this area. It doesn't look like this because there's no detention pond, et cetera. This area is the area that's zoned single-family that has not been approved for any development that's being considered in conjunction with this additional property as well. The entire site is being proposed for a planned unit development to incorporate the multiple housing types. The historic homes that are being preserved is this one and this one.
Any other questions from the Commission? Ms. Mamal-Ali.
Mr. Carlisle, can you say the same thing but with reference to the liquor store that sits right there so that I can get an idea?
Liquor store's right here. This liquor store is in this general location here. There's a bank here.
Right.
And then there's some office buildings that are in this general location.
Got it, thank you.
And then adjacent, this is a single-family neighborhood to the north.
Any other questions? Mr. Tagle.
Can you speak to the historic value of those homes? Are they seriously historic, or are they just old? Are they on a register?
They're old. They're not on they're not in the historic preservation chapter. So they're old but not historically significant.
Okay, all right. I mean, okay, thank you.
I mean, so I do recall, so just piggybacking on Mr. Carlisle's presentation, when we did the neighborhood node walk and talks, I know many of you remember walking this node. City Council also walked that node. And I remember many residents talking about historic Troy Corners and a lot of the resources that have been moved to the museum or demolished. There was recently a home across Livernois that was delisted, and I remember some neighbors concerned about these homes, even though they weren't historic per se, but they're old and they're nice homes. So, for what it's worth.
Any other questions from the Commission? I have one brief one is, normally when we look at planned unit developments, there's usually some kind of a public benefit that comes out. And Mr. Abathera, I'm sure, can answer from his point of view what he views the public benefit to be, but what would you see the public benefit here?
Our discussions, the public benefit, as described to us, was the preservation of those 2 existing homes. First floor masters on not all of the units, but a number of the units, as well as a mix of housing product types on one site.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Faison.
Just to follow up to that question, Mr. Chairman, I thought, and I'm looking for it, I don't see it here, I thought PUDs typically had a mix of uses.
They're not required by ordinance. Many of them do have a mix of uses, but it's not a requirement of the ordinance to have a mix of uses. What a PUD is a flexibility in the zoning ordinance to allow for more creative project. And so that's for that reason. For example, you cannot have single family detached in a form-based district. So this couldn't be zoned form-based. It still preserve those existing houses and have existing single-family homes on them. So that's why the applicant is going through the PUD process to allow for a multitude of housing products that would not be allowed on any single zoning designated district in our city.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Buechner.
3 details. Parking is okay, question mark. Green space seems minimal. And It just seems pretty dense to me. I don't know.
I mean, so again, the concept plan, we haven't got to the details about what the zoning number is. I can't confirm parking because we don't have enough information at this point. Open space requirement would be normally under normal zoning would be 20%. Since it's a planned unit development, there is negotiation with the applicant. If they're not able to provide the 20%, there is a process to get a relief from that requirement. In terms of density, we haven't figured out the calculations. That's something that we would figure out if the application moves forward. But again, that will be a point of discussion with the applicant moving forward. You know, Mr. Buechner, the trade-off is the benefit to the community by having relief in the zoning ordinance through this process. And so it is a discussion, and it's something that the Planning Commission should consider when they consider the application.
So this feels really early in the process?
It's very, very early process.
So our potential recommendation is...
You're not making a recommendation tonight. You're getting guidance to the applicant to either move forward with the plan with changes or say, you know, fundamentally, we don't think this meets the intent of the PU, and we would suggest you look at alternatives.
Mr. Savinant.
Yeah, and maybe I should have introduced this just to be clear for the newer members. So with planning unit developments, because they're negotiated and they tend to be a little more complicated, before the developer goes out and spends, you know, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on design and architecture, and especially for something like this, which I've lost count, 5 different housing types, we bring it for a very informal meeting like this one to the Planning Commission to kind of feel the pulse of the Planning Commission. You know, what do you think? Are you excited by this? Do you have issues? You know, what are those issues, et cetera? And then the developer goes back and thinks about whether, you know, they want to proceed with the project or they want to modify it or what have you. So this is you hit the nail on the head, Mr. Buechner. This is very, very preliminary. We strongly encourage developers to meet with the residents for feedback. That we always encourage this meeting first to kind of feel the pulse of the Planning Commission, get a reality check, and then go to the neighbors to get their feedback. So that hasn't even happened yet.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, so this PUD process stands in stark contrast to the conditional rezoning process. This is your opportunity as a Planning Commission to tell the developer, you know, maybe we want more mixed use in here. Maybe we don't want, you know, all of these different housing types. So that's the purpose of this, is to really let the developer know where your thought process is. Because this is, like Mr. Savinant said, a negotiated process. Completely different than conditional rezoning.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Mawali.
So since we are talking about this concept idea here, I just want the developer to know this in case they have not had a chance to review the comments or information that was shared with the Neighborhood Walk Committee that was done. And this is what I'm pulling from the December meeting that we had here, wherein the neighbors very strictly and very strongly mentioned about the Tisbury Square complex that sits, which is quite tall for that neighborhood node. And also they were quite against having 3 stories. And this is sitting in the neighborhood node as we see in the master plan. And they do not want to see anything that is more than 1 story, but preferably nothing close to 3 stories. I just want you to be aware of that. This particular neighborhood node, which I live very closest to, has a very old Troy feel and look to this neighborhood. And this particular plan that you have here, a concept idea, is too clustered for a 2-lane street that Livernois and Square Lake both are, with no turning lanes. Please make a note of it. There are no turning lanes on those streets for people to come in and out. Because I live so close to this neighborhood node, it's in walking distance for me, I am fully aware of the challenges that we will face with something like this that is too tightly built in a small area. Now, granted, PUD does not have, you don't have to have many different things within it, but your housing options are what you're trying to use the PUD for. But even with that being considered and with the various housing options, it's still too dense for the area. And from what we, the planning commissioners, have heard or during our walks, close to 30 plus people or more were present, very upset and angry about what the future development might be looking like in this area, considering that the Tisbury Square was already something that they were opposed to. I would seriously have you rethink about this, and as Mr. Savidan suggested, talk to the neighbors, talk to the people there, talk to people who use the roads and who live there, because as it stands this way, if it were to come tomorrow in front of us, I would be the first one to raise my hand and say no to it. So just please consider the comments and the suggestions and the feelings of the people who have occupied this neighborhood node for a very long time. This is not a proposal that I for sure will support. Nothing about this is exciting to me. I'm sorry. There's nothing exciting to me about this project.
Any other commissioners have a question? Mr. Hudson.
Very succinctly, I will not vote for a 3-story White Castle development.
Okay, Mr. Kren.
Yeah, regarding, I just want to get I'm looking at this map that's on page, let's see what page it is here. Page 2, it says at the bottom of the page.
Right here, what's it say right here?
Oh my gosh, it's page 69. Well, anyway, it's 2 of the report, but page 69 of the presentation. It shows in that image, it has neighborhood node Q, and it looks like a purple shade color. So the only thing in the neighborhood node is just that lower section that is going to have a retention pond and a few of the homes. Most of it is in another, as in a green area, and I believe is that R1B?
Single-family residential.
Yeah, okay, so the point I'm getting at is, that's not even in a neighborhood node, those kind of qualifications. So to have 3-story homes in an R1B, a current one, and then to have it later designated as a PUD, I wouldn't go for anything above a 2-story home in that zone. And in addition to that, I did get comments, we all received comments from Mariana Parakis, and she had that same sentiment. I would, just to state what she said, in general, I'm opposed to 3-story homes, 3 stories anywhere in a PUD. So again, you're getting a lot of pushback from people immediately about 3 stories as a no-go for this area. And she did also say, and I agree with her, when we were meeting on our tours with this particular neighborhood node, she brought up the comment that what about creating a village, because that's what we were talking about that could be utilized in that area. And she says, like the one we love in the northwest corner of Waddles and John R. So anyway, I agree with her on that. I think a village, some winding streets. This looks like a set of dominoes in a box. It's just like creativity completely nil. I mean, honestly, I think even elementary school children would do a better job of laying out homes. It's just packed. So that's my thoughts.
Any other comments for Mr. Carlisle? Is it appropriate to bring up Mr. Abathira to give some insight? Mr. Abathira, come on up and you can respond to some of these questions and maybe give some of your point of view on why you think this is a good plan. Make sure you sign in.
Oh, yes. Good evening. As you know, Gary Abathira. I've owned the property for a while. I am very pleased that we are here so I can hear everybody's response rather than designing something. I want to hear everybody's, what they have. My thinking on this is I have 14 units that we're going to put in already. And when I did those 14 units, I bought this property and I was going to tear down the 4 houses on Livernois and put in 12 new houses in there. They'd be 4,500 square foot houses, and I want to do something different. So I looked at some of the old houses. I listened to what you guys say. I listened to the people. They want to save the old houses. So I want to save two of the houses come in from that way. I've talked to the neighbors to the north. Those are the only neighbors I talk to. There's nobody to the south. I'm not going to talk to the liquor store. I'm not going to talk to the office buildings. I don't think they have a say in what goes in there. Just my opinion. People in the north, I had a meeting with them at the community center. This was probably 3 years ago. They were in favor of what I have. They like the way that I have ranches, 2-story, and then it came to 3-story. Since that 3 years ago to now, everybody's turned against 3 stories because of the project on the other side of Livernois. I agree with them. It's built right to the front of the road. What I would like to do is, I already have 14 units in there, is I want to push them further back from the road. If you notice, I was 10, 60, 70 feet off the road. Now I'm 120, 130 feet off the road. You're not going to notice them. You're not going to see them as much as 10 feet off the road. I put them in there. The stuff to the north, I put 2 stories, so they're no taller than the houses behind them. So I'm buffering the 2s to the 3s coming. The ground drops off a lot. So our 3 stories won't be seen as much. I put single stories to the north because people want single story ranches. So I put single stories in there. Now, I did the layout myself, along with my team member, PEA. I want to save the 2 old houses. If you could tell me a better way to come in and do something, I'm all ears listening. So I came in that way and trying to figure out how to put it in. That stuff to the north is not a neighborhood node. It is an R1B. So on your neighborhood node meetings, you didn't change the zoning to neighborhood node up there, so I can't build it as a neighborhood node. So I left it at that. The 5 3-stories that are on Livernois, I disagree with you guys up here, is the 2 old houses I'm leaving are 3-story houses. They are 33 feet tall. So if I build my units the same height as them, it's going to blend right in as to what they look like. That is my reasoning for doing 3 stories up there. And I'd like to speckle the 14 that I have in there that would move out of the neighborhood node into the R1B. Those are my thoughts of what could happen in there. If you want to see some more 2 stories in there, less 3 stories, I can listen to it. I'm here. I want to make sure that you want to see this and you don't want to see 12 4,500 square foot houses in there. I don't think that's what we want from what I listened to. I feel it's a very big thing, and if you would like to come see one of the old houses, one is vacant right now. It is a 120-year-old beautiful house. It's been redone. It has all the old stuff in it. It's built in late 1800s, early 1900s, and it's not on the register, so I can keep it, I can tear it down. Beautiful landscaping around it. I'm just trying to blend in the old Troy with the new Troy here. And there's not really much beauty in that corner there. There's a concrete bank with a big concrete parking lot in one corner. The other corner has a big concrete parking lot with a shopping center. The other one has a gas station with the walls that keep getting hit over by cars. So we're not looking at Somerset Mall corner there. It needs a lot of work going in there, and I'm trying my best at what I can do to improve it, but I do feel if I don't build my 14 units and I have the speckled in there, it's going to be safer for the cars coming in off of Livernois than to be coming in off of Square Lake, because Square Lake only has a 30-foot access, and it's in there. To answer somebody's question about 2-lane roads, I think Mrs. Malapau, I've been in engineering and traffic, and I want to know why they don't make it 5 lanes. They say it does not merit 5 lanes or 3 lanes because there's not enough traffic on Livernois. And I drive up and down Livernois and Square Lake all the time. You can go talk to them and get the same thing, is they will not do it because there's not enough traffic. Even though we all complain there's a lot of traffic, they will not widen the roads. So I can't do anything except build on what they have there. So if there's some questions I can answer for you guys right now, and I did, had some thoughts in my head, is that with everything there's good and bad. I'm just trying to outweigh the bads with the goods. I feel saving the old houses is a really good. I think building the ranch units on North End, really good. Building the 2 stories with the first floor master, really good. Pushing the 3 stories back further, really good. Adding more 3 stories, probably not as good. So I can have some give and take there. But if, everybody just says, we don't want any, and that's that. I think in the email I got is she wants me to get rid of my 3-story, 14-unit buildings already and design something different. And I don't think that's right, that I have to cancel something I already have been approved to make something else go on. So I am just want to negotiate with you guys and see what we need to do to make it good for both of us. But with that, I'd love to take some questions.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So glad to hear that you're open to some of the suggestions that we will want to kind of share with you. And one of the things is because of the old nature of that area, that 4 intersection that I'm talking about, why not create a community feel instead of just stacking so many buildings in that area? Why not be creative in not just the fact that it's 3 stories, because 3 stories is definitely something that we've heard plentiful about. But it's also the fact that why not create a village environment? Why not create a courtyard-like setting with houses around it? Something that is going to add appeal to that neighborhood and also bring in a missing middle housing types too, along with maybe having those ranch condos in the back as you're thinking about. Why stack so many buildings in in those areas?
Where do we have in the city a community that has a big center thing with houses around it that I could look at and get an idea for?
So that's a good question. And that's one thing that we, planning commissioners, when we attended a training session, we were shown areas, I think it was in Michigan, but probably also outside of, where they are trying to create different living communities. Communities that can be engaged in with each other, houses facing each other, but not just the streets, but having a courtyard-like feel, just to create an atmosphere of more neighborly sentiment or living. I don't know how big of an area we are talking about here in terms of acreage, but I'm just thinking going low on housing units, but going more on green space and community engagement areas. Wouldn't that fit well with the neighborhood area that we are talking about? We have Troy Corners in one area, we have a gas station, so you have a lot of amenities already there. We have the bank, you have that liquor store. Although it's a liquor store, it's also a very good serving unit for many snacks and other items too. So you have a lot of kids during summer. You will see them sitting out on the benches and drinking or eating some of the Slurpees or whatever that they get from there. The idea is it's already having that neighborhood feel there. I'm just trying to see if you can bring in that village element that our fellow commissioner also pointed out, something where we can have it be a little bit more community feel as opposed to just stacked units of townhomes and condos. My feeling, my thoughts.
Mr. Tagle?
You asked a question that made me think, where in Troy could you see something like this? And my thought was, why wouldn't we create something different than what's in Troy and be unique in that respect, as opposed to doing more of the same? And I think that's really what when this commission looked at different developments, not only in Michigan, I mean, there are a lot of them on the west side of the state, but in other communities that are very successful, that really had that more walkable feel and that less structured feel that we're talking about here. So I think looking at something really different than what we've normally seen coming in this community would be an advantage to you as far as a saleable market. And the other thing is, just a thought as well, those units between the historic homes, you say there are 3-story homes, the 2 bookends, if you will. Mm-hmm. I think what would enhance those or maybe make those the focal point would not to be competing with them with more 3-story volumes between them, but those bookends would be more prominent if that building between them was a lower, a less quiet response, and let those historic homes really kind of shine on their own.
Okay.
Just a question. So I forgot actually, though. How much is the total acreage with all these things included?
I think there's 5 acres there. It's not like we're talking 10, 15, 20 acres, where if you had something, you could really do a big area. It's not as big of a piece as it looks.
Okay.
And back to, doing all that is, I'm not the size developer that can go out and risk this whole new project of doing this and doing that and find out it flops, because I'm just a one-man crew. I'm not like Mondrian, where they've got teams and people of teams and people come up here and talk for an hour and a half and tell you everything about all their projects. That's more for them doing that, because if it fails, they can just move on. If it fails for me, I'm done. So I want to do something I know is going to work, but if we can go back to my plan, just so I can get you guys' opinions, is does the board like that I'm trying to save the 2 old houses? Is that a consensus? Is we're good with that?
Sure.
And I think we're good with the 4 ranches on the north end. Okay. If I took the 3 stories out of between the 2 and made those 2 stories like Mr. Tagle suggested, it'd be enhancing the bookends. Is that a true statement too? I mean, is everybody on board with that right now? Because my engineer is standing behind me, so he'll be doing the drawings for me. He's the one who I dictated to draw this, and he'll be doing that. My PUD that's approved down there has 14 units, so I would like to be able to put 14 3-stories in, and then the rest either 2-story or 1-story. But I would like to be able to move them from the neighborhood node, so they're further off the road, but they're going to encroach into R1B. That's a give and take, and I think is that, I know you've said anything with 3-story, I'm totally against, but if I still have been approved for 14, are you fine with having 14 in there? Mr. Hudson?
I'll wait to see.
Okay, all right. And then, I think we like the 2-story with the 1st floor master that abuts the north ends of people's properties too. I will work on Mr. Beekner, who thinks there should be more open space or a better park area. I will work on doing that, and I'll get rid of the 3 stories that are too many, drop them down to a 2-story. A 2-story is will be no taller than what's allowed in the R1B district. So they're not going to be taller as if I went to R1B and built 4,500 square foot homes in there. So.
Mr. Beekner?
I go outside of the lines. Mr. Carlisle, do you have any thoughts? I mean, you've got a wealth of knowledge. Do you have any thoughts for him on how to make it?
Wealth of knowledge, wow.
More community?
Mr. Beekner, I appreciate the opportunity. I really am more interested in hearing what the Planning Commission particularly says about this. I do echo some of the concerns I heard earlier that were raised by the Planning Commission. I do feel a little uncomfortable with the kind of the trading during the meeting kind of discussion. I'd rather you hear the comments of the Planning Commission, you put your best foot forward and come back with a revised plan, but you can certainly seek additional feedback from the Planning Commission. But I don't think it's appropriate necessarily to put the Planning Commission on the spot about what they'd like or don't like.
Well, I won't hold them to it, but I just want to make sure that I come back with it and they just say, Gary, we don't like it at all.
Mr. Krent's been waiting for a while, so.
Yeah, I brought up earlier the enclave area that housing development on, is it Waddles and John R?
Yep.
Yeah.
Northwest corner. Northeast corner.
Yeah. Right. Have you ever looked at that?
I've driven through there once.
Okay,
a long time ago.
that's a winding road, a little more circular. The housing types look very attractive. That's what I would like to see if you wanted, my two cents. Okay. Something not so like a box of dominoes.
Okay.
Mr. Faison.
I just had a question. I was wondering if you were headed in a different direction. You said lower heights, and then did you also say less density or more green space?
Yes, I will make sure that we have the green space. Mr. Beekner said he didn't think there was enough, and we'll make sure that there's green space in there.
I agree with that comment. So I think that is moving in the right direction.
Okay.
And then did you also say, and I'm not negotiating with you or anything like that, did you also say the only 3-story units would be the 14 that are already approved?
Yes.
So significantly less than you have in this plan?
Yes, we could take some of those 3s and turn them to 2s and make it into that.
Mr. Tagle, is you have something?
Yeah, well,
yeah, that's fine.
Staff just walked out of the room, but maybe Mr. Carlisle.
We've got a wealth of knowledge there. Ben Phillips.
Who has a wealth of knowledge. Now, maybe talking to Ben and to Mr. Savidan, they could show you some examples of some very successful, not necessarily what we see in Troy, but successful developments that might be a little bit more along the lines of what we're verbalizing here. And I also think that those developments have been done successfully. So there are some best practices you could maybe, learn or glean from those types of developments so you don't, step in some pitfalls that maybe someone has already stepped in and has, come up with a better way to do it or a way to avoid. Because certainly, we obviously want you to succeed in this endeavor as well. Certainly we don't want you to be gambling with such an unknown that, it could put you out of business.
Because what I know is 4,500 square foot houses, I could bulldoze, put a road in, and have them sold by Christmas time. And I don't want to do that. I want to do something different because
That's really good to hear, because one of the discussions we've had in this commission, and we scratch our heads, because I mentioned earlier about some developments on the west side of the state. They're unique, they're very cool, they're populated, and we just can't understand why in this side of the state can't developers look at doing something a little different than what's always been done. And I don't know why. So it's really good to hear that you're considering, hey, let's maybe think out of the box a little bit. Let's maybe look and see what else we can do.
I was going to tell you earlier, whatever the gentleman said before for an hour up here, I was going to say ditto, because everything he said was exactly what I'm looking for, except I don't want to build for the 50 and over crowd. I feel that the younger people would move in here, the middle-aged and the older people. I don't want to say my community I want for 50 and over only. I want them all to come in, because as I've said here many times, is the young people are looking to stay in Troy and they can't afford anything. And that's why they're moving Hazel Park, Ferndale, Royal Oak, all moving out different areas. So I'm looking, anything I can put that's affordable that we can keep them here, because that's going to be our future of Troy. Because once we're all beyond here, we want the young people to come back into there. So I'm looking for, that's why I did so many different ones. The ranch units are definitely for the older people, the 2-story for the middle-aged, and the 3 stories that I have are for the younger people. And they can all be in the same community, same neighborhood.
Mr. Rahman.
Yeah, just I agree with what Ms. Malala Hali said, because I was also in the neighborhood meetings with the neighbors, and they're pretty serious about that. That they want to keep that village type or the old-fashioned, what's that, Wattles and Livernois intersection. That's very unique. So I will be very careful. You already heard what others said. Definitely want to see not more than 2-story. That's number one. Number two, more green space. And then what I would like to see is if you could just, we all spoke about the Wattles and John R., right? Wattles and John R., that corner, right? So if you could map the area and how many houses they have there, and then compare that, maybe you can see the business case. Because I remember I know that there are like 2,600 square feet, but then they're attached, they could be like 2 houses instead of 1. Maybe it would be a business case. So I just want to make sure that you compare your area that you have, and can we do something like that? Okay. Obviously, a lot more green space. That would be my, suggestion.
Hey, Ms. Malala Hali.
To your point, that particular space there will be occupied with a lot of younger people, younger couples.
Absolutely.
And I'll tell you why, and young families too. Why? Because Troy preschool is just a walking distance away. So do you have potential to attract the younger crowd there? Absolutely. Do you already have existing amenities in that area? Yes. Kroger is just a 2-minute drive. It is a fantastic location from that point of view. Access to Rochester Road, access to Livernois, access to 75 down South Square Lake. It's a great neighborhood area to attract young people. And with the Troy preschool there, you potentially will have a lot of younger people moving in. So if the more you provide, as Mr. Tagle pointed out, some different living communities, I'm sure that will be a winning winning development for you, for the lack of a better word.
Don't you think young people like 3 stories?
Young people, not 3 stories is something that I'm still going to be very.
I just asked, don't you think young people?
But 2 stories, yes. 2 stories, yes. But what I mean to say is those 2 stories or amount of units you put in there, they want to have some walking space, they want to have bike space, little young kids trying to use skateboards. I mean, I'm talking about a living, breathing community space that you want to also create using the space. You have a lot going on in that neighborhood node, and it's a very cozy neighborhood node. It's a very cozy,
Not a
homely
neighborhood
feel.
node. It's not a neighborhood.
Well, when I say that, I'm talking about, I understand. Yours may not be in that area, but generally speaking, when we went on the walking tours, and what we heard is they would like to retain that cozy feel in that area, okay? So that's what I'm just hinting at, for you to kind of look into and see how you can come up with a better vision.
Okay.
Any more comments from Mr. Abathira? Just appreciate you coming to talk to us. If not everyone on the commission knows, not only are you a Troy-based small business person, but you live in Troy, so I know you have the interest of the community at heart, and in spite of the fact you're wearing a Troy Colts shirt, we'll ignore that part.
Because.
Right, I'm on that side of the Liberty, Rochester Road. So yes, I will work on a different type of some layouts in there and see what we can do, and we'll have, all the good elevations, the heights will be right, the materials will be good, everything will be what we're looking for. But I do believe there's some very good positives in there by saving the old houses. I think that's number one best thing there, and I do believe by not putting 14 close to the road, it's going to be pushed back, and it'll help that look of not being right on top of the road.
Great.
So with that, I don't know if anyone else has any more questions for me, or? Okay.
I think we're all done. Thank you.
I'll see you in another month then.
All right.
I'll drop, see what we have off. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda are public comments for items on the agenda, and I don't think anyone else is left who doesn't have anything to speak, so we'll pass on that, and then we'll go on to Planning Commission comments, and we'll start down with Mrs. Arnecki and then work our way this way. No comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, none.
Okay.
Ditto.
Nothing, thanks.
No comment.
Nothing from me.
Nothing from me?
I'm good, thank you.
I'm good, thanks.
Mr.
Nothing for
Freeman?
me, thank you.
Wait a minute. You've got to announce the big news from the news flash from about 5 minutes ago.
Oh, what's up?
Oh, my husband and son are at the baseball game today. My son just caught a home run ball.
Oh, wow.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's a treat.
Probably wasn't Miguel Cabrera, though.
I don't know, I didn't ask him whose ball it was.
Okay.
I got nothing.
With that, we are adjourned.
All right.